Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the January 19th meeting of the Morro Bay Planning Commission. Would you all please let the record reflect that Commissioner Sorensen is absent. The remaining 4 commissioners are present. We have a quorum, and the meeting is called to order. And would you all please join me by starting the meeting with a moment of silence? Thank you. Okay, if you'll rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. This is a time that we set aside for Planning Commissioner announcements. Are there any announcements this evening? Any words of wisdom to pass along? Okay. Seeing none, we will move on to words of wisdom from the public. This is public comment on any items which are not on this evening's agenda. Anyone who'd like to speak to the Commission on whatever's on your mind, please come forward, and we'd love to hear from you. Okay, then seeing none, we will move on to the consent calendar. Consent calendar this evening includes minutes from the November 24th and December 1st meeting, as well as the current and advanced planning processing list. Would anyone like to make any remarks, corrections?
Yeah, that's why, Scott, I noticed the high school pool is listed on there. Is that something that's going to come before us at all, or is it just for permit review?
Yeah, it's going to come before the Planning Commission. We're completing the AB 52 review period, which is for Native American tribes right now, at which point we'll start work on, I think I was talking with Cindy Jason, our associate planner, about an hour ago, and she's hoping to get to work on the environmental document and perhaps get it maybe complete by the end of this week, at which point we'll send it off to the clearinghouse, and so you're probably about a month and a half, 2 months away from it coming before the commission.
I don't know if you can answer this, but do you know, did the public have a chance to review or comment on that with the school board deliberations that would have gone through?
I'm sorry, I don't know what forum they took the pool design through the school board. I'm not sure what that looked like. I mean, I can certainly, before we come back, find out though. I'm going to make a note right when I'm done talking, and so Cindy follows up with it. So.
Okay, sure.
I noticed on the news that they had an announcement that the aquarium was going to be redone. Do we have any news on that?
So we took the consent of landowner to the city council for to have the Central Coast Aquarium, so the Avila Beach, the facility that they have there, to enter into an agreement with them to construct a new aquarium facility. It's probably going to be an $8 to $10 million facility. So the consent of landowner basically says, hey, go ahead and go get your concept plan done and go to Planning Commission and City Council. And when it gets done with that process, then they would start negotiating the lease once they got through to the concept process with the city. So we're going to be working with them sort of hand in hand right now. They had an initial design, so if you were looking at the our city council package, you might have noticed a somewhat modern looking building that probably didn't comply with much in the way of our waterfront master plan requirements. But that was put together by a Cal Poly architecture student, and was really just to be preliminary in nature and to cover really the floor plan, the things they need on the individual floors, to kind of lay it out. So we'll be working with them kind of hand in hand as that moves forward, and they're going to hire an architect to do the overall plan. So yeah, that's going to be coming forward here in a little while. Kind of exciting, big deal for the city. It sounds like it's going to be a really nice facility, and certainly the most probably the most expensive build on the Embarcadero waterfront side of things when it's done, when all's said and done.
Any other questions, comment? Scott, is there any recent updates on the wastewater treatment plant site?
On the wastewater treatment plant sites, not much beyond. City is looking at a couple of different options out there, McIlvain obviously being one of them. Potentially there are others. We haven't got anything locked in place at this point. We're still continuing, we're kind of moving forward through that process right now and talking to landowners and that type of thing. So that's kind of where it's at. I mean, we're talking to various folks to see which might be the best fit, and then we have to do a constraints kind of analysis on each one of the properties to see if they'll work. And so that's kind of the phase we're in right now.
Okay.
With regards to that, I know Harbor was looking for a place to dump their dredge spoils. Are they still looking at doing that on a site that we're picking for a WRF?
I think that's just a need in general that they have, because getting rid of the dredge spoils is problematic and can be expensive if you're moving them off-site. And so that's always something that's sitting out there, kind of on their radar, and specifically in relationship to not only the main channel that we normally dredge, but also further on in the bay in the
State Marina.
Yeah, exactly, the State Parks Marina over there. More specifically in that location, what we can do with the dredge spoils there.
Yeah.
And so there's been some options that have been talked about, but I think that's predominantly where a lot of that conversation's come into play, at least recently.
Yeah, my understanding is that those are problematic because of the silt content and
It's exactly
60-40 thing and all that.
It's exactly the issue. Yeah, you're correct.
All right.
Okay, just trying to keep up on that. Okay, so do we have a motion with regard to the consent calendar?
Move we approve the consent calendar.
I'll second.
So we have a motion and we have a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay? No, that was not. That was not a nay. That was 4-0. Okay. So then moving ahead to our public hearing for this evening, we only have one public hearing item, which is B1, which consists actually of two cases. CP0-469 and 470 and UP0 number -414 and 415 at 1147 and 1149 West Avenue here in Morro Bay. And I believe that Whitney has the chair on this one.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. This is, as you said, two actual cases. They are adjacent to one another on West Street at 1147 and 1149 West Street, and similar enough that we felt we could look at them together, since they probably will be likely under construction together, and are in fact very similar. The Commission, however, will have to take two separate actions to approve each one. There are two separate resolutions attached to your staff report when we get to that point. So as you begin to say in introducing this, this is two coastal development and conditional use permits to allow for demolition of existing residential structures which are on site. They're vacant, older, not in very good condition, and construction of two new single-family houses. This is in the Embarcadero Bluff area in the R2 PD Beach Street specific plan zone. This is actually a continued review from an August hearing to allow for some additional archaeological surveying of the sites. That survey work was completed, and The report concluded that no adverse impacts to significant historic archaeological materials are likely as a result of this project, either of these projects. A detailed monitoring plan is recommended to further ensure construction does not impact any unforeseen significant materials, and that is attached as an Exhibit A to the resolution. And just another note on the August hearing, commissioners commented on architecture somewhat, and the applicants have made a few changes in response to those comments. Commissioners also raised some questions regarding geotechnical concerns, specifically having to do with potential surcharge and drainage, and we'll be discussing that, I'm sure, later on. I just wanted to point out that you all have letters from Praxis in front of you, an engineer who has addressed that surcharge concern. So I think I'll just run through these slides quickly. Maybe if my little guy works. Oh, now it's working. No, it's not. Why isn't it working? I'm going to have to play my music again. Yeah. Okay. Oh, I love this. Okay, so here we are on a sunny day looking west and from West Avenue, the existing structures on site. Next slide, please. This is an aerial roughly in the center of the screen. You can kind of see that there were those two smaller structures. Oh, thank you. This is a view from down below on Front Street, and that red arrow points to the larger of the two residential structures on site that's closer to the bluff edge. This does not show up well at all. Good thing that you have your 11 by 17 site plans and full-size plans in your packet. We'll move right along. Well, again, this is a proposed site plan, and I'm sorry that it's not darker. Okay, and the proposed landscaping plan, which I just would comment is fairly conceptual in nature at this point in time, and we'll be looking for a lot more detail as to irrigation and plant type at building permit stage. Landscaping will be one of the ways to help differentiate these two projects. And it's not working anymore. Oh, wow. It doesn't like me. So front and rear elevations for the 1147 West Street project. Uses some horizontal siding, stonework, pretty rectilinear windows. And I'll let the designer talk more on the architecture as well. Okay, these were the previous side elevations, and one of the things that the commissioners had commented on earlier was to sort of have a little more continuity of material from on all sides of the buildings. The earlier plans showed the sides as completely stucco. The revised plans that you have before you tonight continue the horizontal siding at the upper level of the house on both sides. And color materials, which you also have in your packet. It's kind of light, sort of a bluish gray, some variegated stone, still in that same kind of bluish gray color range, and asphalt shingle roofing. Okay, so moving on to 1149, front and rear elevations. It's a different style of architecture, somewhat more Mediterranean Spanish elements in it. Again, these sides are also stucco, but that kind of makes a little bit more sense with the materials that were proposed for this project, with the tile roof, etc. This just shows a slight change in the treatment of the windows on the side to have that sort of upper lintel and lower sill. And we were recommending that windows on this be recessed, and I think Chuck Stevenson, the applicant designer, will speak to that a little bit too in his presentation. And color material, sort of different, warmer tones. So this is just sort of a sneak view through the buildings. We did ask them to do a street view. Obviously, we're going to have much bigger buildings, but there'll still be some view through them. This is as-built home just a couple of lots to the north from where these are proposed, kind of showing what these new buildings are going to look like to a certain extent when they're put on the lot. And then the applicants had prepared some perspective drawings. So you'll see there's a slide 1 and slide 2 from down below. Slide 1 is from up on West Street, and that's this one. Kind of give you an idea of at least sort of massing and scale. They won't have those 3 chimneys coming straight out of the roof. And this is from down below on Front Street, again toward the center of the screen, just below that tree limb. Okay. So that's all I have for you in terms of slides. We did make some minor recommendations to the architecture, such as recessing the windows on 1149 and perhaps having still a little more unified window treatment on 1147. You specifically, Commissioner Lohr had asked that the geotechnical report be given to each of you, and so that was provided, and I hope that was helpful to you. And as I noted earlier, we did resolve any archaeological issues with this property. So staff is recommending approval with the conditions noted in the resolutions and the attachment that specifically deals with archaeological monitoring. I'll try and answer your questions, and then I know Chuck Stevenson will probably also be making a presentation to you.
Okay. Are there any questions for staff at this time? I had one question, Whitney. One of the planning conditions that was added on the basis of the geotechnical report was that there not be any walls or fences within 5 feet of the top of the bluff.
Correct.
If I'm not reading the plans incorrectly, the current plans show a wall right at the top of the bluff. So that would have to be modified.
That would have to be modified, and there wasn't really a lot of detail proposed there as to wall. We had discussed potential like garden fence kind of thing. I think wall was maybe what they had in mind. I spoke with a gentleman at Praxis Engineering firm about some of the surcharge concerns that had been raised, and he basically recommended that 5-foot setback.
Okay,
just to be sure that it wasn't loading right exactly at the sort of bluff bend point.
Mm-hmm. So is that a yes then?
So yes, that's an added condition.
Pardon?
That's an added condition.
Okay, so that would have to be modified then.
And that would be modified, yes.
Okay. And the other question I had about the geotechnical report is it mentions the fact, and it is true, that the lower part of the slope is currently retained. Has there been any examination of that? I mean, that's an older retaining wall. Has there been any examination of that to find out what condition it's in?
If there has, I don't know about that.
Okay. 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 That's all the questions I have. Any? No other? Then we will open this up for public comment, and we'll ask, or at least give the opportunity first for the applicant or applicants or their representatives to speak first. I realize there may be multiple.
Thank you, Chairman Taft and members of the commission. I'm Chuck Stevenson. I'm here this evening representing A.J. Wright and Bill Merrifield on these projects. So when we met last August, I took notes about some of the comments and concerns you had, and I know Whitney has addressed several of those, but so I thought I'd just highlight a few myself to enhance that a bit. First of all, relative to the archaeological study, the archaeologist found nothing of significance on the site, which we're pleased about. But of course, the monitoring plan is necessary for the excavation activities that will occur, just so we're double sure that that won't be an issue, and we're okay with that. Relative to the architecture, we did take into consideration the recommendation for including the lap siding on both sides of the building. We considered just the upper half or going all the way down to the ground. And a couple of reasons why we decided to stay with, and maybe if Whitney can put that slide up. One of the reasons we thought we'd stay with the upper half of the building was more or less for maintenance reasons. Lap siding does require painting, and in a marine climate, it's really a maintenance issue over time. And so Mr. Merrifield is concerned about costs relative to maintenance on that. So that was one reason. Another was that viewed from the street, it's not likely that this area will be that visible. And frankly, from just a mix of material and color, this, I think, adds some interest to the building. Having said that, we're not opposed to, if your commission is so inclined to want to see this extended to the ground, that's something we could live with. On Mr. Wright's house, we did take into consideration the recommendations of staff for trim details as well as the recessed window. And the recessed window is probably something we would have done anyway. We're using 2x6 walls, and it's fairly easy to design for that that relief on windows for that, providing that inset. So we're happy with that. I would note that because these buildings are similar floor plans, obviously, but we went to a great extent, in our opinion, to distinguish them from one another, going one with a prairie-style design, with ledgestone, lap siding. The window, the fenestration design is very typical of what you'd see in a part of a prairie design, contrasted with a very recognizable Mediterranean style. So this was all done mainly because we're sort of value engineering these. These are not spec homes. These are homes that Mr. Merrifield will be his primary residence, as well as Mr. Wright. And so some concern about some advantages of having engineering costs reduced and so forth, and able to build two houses that were relatively similar. But I think it was pointed out in the last hearing, this is something that's very often done throughout the community. We shared concern about a potential surcharge on the lower retaining wall. This is always an issue with when building above another property. And so we had really two professionals comment on this. Fred Pothast from Earth System, who I believe Whitney spoke to about this, and Fred recommended that that wall be moved back off the edge of the bluff, which is fine. And he also commented that this would not present a surcharge. But I also wanted our structural engineer who designed our house structure to also comment on this. And so you have that letter from Praxis indicating that there will be no surcharge on that wall. So as to your question about the integrity of the wall, that would be something that we feel would be really the owner's responsibility on that. We're not going to be imposing any new or additional surcharge on that wall. Relative to drainage, this is something that's very important to us, and so our civil engineer is preparing a drainage plan, and he's in communication with the city engineer to make sure that all of our surface discharge is taken to either the street or to a drainage pit area out toward West Avenue. And this has been the accepted practice for several years here. So we're in close communication with that, and that plan will be reviewed and approved by the city. Relative to landscaping, as Whitney mentioned, we submitted a conceptual landscape plan to show that we're looking for compliance with policy relative to low water using plant materials, conservative planting areas, and drought tolerant plants and so forth. What we'll be doing with our final landscape plans that will be submitted with the building permit will be uniquely designing each one of those to reflect and enhance sort of the architectural feel of the home. So they'll each be different, each be distinctive and attractive, and yet be low water users, water tolerant, and sort of conservative amounts of area. And then there was some discussion about a wall that was built along West Avenue, and I think maybe we thought at the time that was on the subject property, but it's actually on the property to the north, the neighbor's property. And I just drove by there this evening, and apparently it looks to be in conformance to my eye. It looks to be 3 feet above the sidewalk. There are columns or pilasters, which may be an issue, but that's on a neighboring property. There are no walls along West Avenue for the subject property. I would point out, though, just from my perspective as a planner, West Avenue is a unique and different neighborhood. It's half of it serves as a service alley for commercial businesses. There's auto repair across the street. There's other commercial businesses, and in fact, it even looks like an alley. It has a center drain, and so we have homes on one side, which is and then commercial businesses on the other. So we don't have that sort of typical neighborhood configuration, if you will. We, in our neighborhoods, we know who our neighbors are. We know who's coming and going. We kind of get a feel for neighborhood security. In a neighborhood like on West Avenue, we have employees, we have customers, deliveries, people coming and going all the time. In fact, there are many of the employees park on the west side of West Avenue and presently drive up into what will be landscaped areas. So there is this concern, legitimately, I think that some neighbors may have, to sort of define that space, not necessarily in a tall wall, but at least to define that area as this is residential. So just something for you to think about. It's perhaps a little different consideration. And as far as our project is concerned, we're not proposing any walls that would be higher than 3 feet. That's the requirement for site distance issues. But it's possible that those will be requested. We've reviewed the other conditions of approval and have no issues with those. So thank you. That concludes my comments, and I'm available for any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else who would like to comment on this project?
Good evening. My name's Peter Beeman, and we're the owners and operators of the Bayfront Inn, which is the property located just below this project. Excuse me. And also Frankie and Lola's Restaurant, which is also located below this project. You know, we wish the developers all the success, but we have some concerns as neighbors. First of all, one of the people in the council, excuse me, in the group, asked if there's been any inspection on the retaining wall below, and the answer is there has not been. And that property is probably vintage early 60s. So that's for your information. So that's probably one of our primary concerns, is the runoff from this property. Is it going to be contained within the property or be taken somewhere else, as opposed to being, you know, coming down on our property? So I would really encourage you to look closely at that. And I'm wondering if possibly we should have an opportunity to look at that drainage plan before there's an approval, because to our mind, that's a key issue. The only other comment really that I would make is our property is a 16-unit hotel. The hotels, as you know, are the main economic engine in this town. And the other tenant in the property is the restaurant. So our other concern is the hours of construction. I don't know if there's any possibility that there could be some restriction on that. I know typically construction is starting at 7 o'clock in the morning and can run as late as 7 o'clock at night. And that may not be the best for a hotel guest, and I'm just wondering if there could be some consideration for that, because the construction noise will be highly disruptive for people who are staying as guests at the hotel. And plus, there is a hotel adjacent to us, also a smaller one. And though they're not here tonight, I'm sure that is going to be of some concern to them as well. But other than those items, I wish them all the luck in the world, and I appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. So seeing none, we'll bring it back to the commission for comments, or I'm sorry, are there any questions from the commission to the applicant or applicant's representative?
Yeah.
Jerry.
Probably for either the soils engineer or the architect.
Chuck Stevenson.
Okay. Well, one of my concerns before was handling drainage and runoff. And you mentioned either a pit or taking it to West Street. The elevations are pretty tight to get subsurface drainage out to West Street. Mm-hmm. I would be really concerned about a pit in that area, because you have gravel and compacted sand. So any pit drainage is going to drain down to the bluff area and drain off of that lens area into the retaining walls. So I would like to see a restriction on this for...
We can't add that restriction. That's against the stormwater guidelines. The city has the adopted city stormwater guidelines.
Which was state.
Yeah, which is exactly in compliance with state law. We can't do that.
Even though it impacts the...
We don't have any, one, we don't have any information that it impacts anything. And two, it's the requirement how we design the drainage on site. We have very limited authority to deviate from the adopted stormwater guidelines that the city has put in place.
I got a question for you, Scott. Those SSMPs, those stormwater guidelines, and also there's the sanitary sewer management plan, because there's a sewer line there. My understanding is that they're in need of an update from the city. I think, aren't they like the last time they've been updated was like 7 years ago?
You're talking about the stormwater management plan?
Mm-hmm.
Or the sewer infrastructure.
Sanitary sewer management program as well.
They're both about 7 or 8 years old, I believe.
Yeah, and aren't they supposed to update them every 5 years?
In a perfect world, it's nice to have them updated about that frequently. Most cities don't adhere to that, in my experience.
I just would respond to that. I did have a conversation briefly with Commissioner Sadowski this afternoon, and he was expressing his concerns regarding drainage as well, and especially today in the rain. I was looking at the site and noticed that West Street is built with sort of a V to channel to the center of the street, which is where the sewer manhole is, not too far from these properties. And I will definitely bring that to the attention of Public Works. And I did speak with Rob Leibig briefly, and there are city engineering standards to call her up if necessary, say a road is resurfaced or something, where you would need to bring that manhole to a higher elevation. And whenever West Street is worked on, I'm sure that will be addressed.
And then I asked you about an ordinance about pooling stormwater runoff from like a residence onto a sewer easement. Did they have an ordinance like that?
No, he said no, he couldn't point to any particular resolution, or any particular regulation to that effect. But just in terms of our standard engineering design guidelines, that wouldn't be allowed.
Okay.
So, Scott, excuse me. I'm sorry, you kind of got into conversation here. When you have a site like this that could surcharge with drainage for another site that could create problems, we don't have the ability to mitigate that?
So, well, I think the answer to the question is it should be analyzed as part of the building permit submittal. That's typically where we would pick this up. So they would come with a design that says this is what we're going to do to address our stormwater, and then we would take a look at what the impacts are from that. Because sometimes we have some areas in town you can't infiltrate.
Right.
So we do in those circumstances have the ability to deviate. That's all. It's entirely based on the soils reports, and they go along with it. So yes, we have the ability to deviate, but we do have requirements we have to follow. So we haven't gotten to that level of design at this point because we don't usually get there until we're at building. And so that's when we typically address those, and that's when everybody's reviewing at that point too, as well as, there's review by the planners, review by the city's engineering division, and that type of thing. So, and the building department.
Where I was going with this was to see if we could, this seems like an area of concern, or would be an area of concern for me and also the downslope neighbor. So I think this would be something that would need to be looked at fairly intensely so that we won't create problems for the adjacent neighbors.
We can add, conditioning to the satisfaction of the city engineer. It's the Engineering Public Works Department that does the review on the stormwater requirements and reviews the soils report as it relates to the stormwater plans that are submitted for the residents. We could add a little extra oomph to that by, with that in there. If you'd like.
Okay.
I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Maybe we could ask the designer here. Have you looked at whether it's feasible to take all the drainage to West Street?
Okay, so this is really important. This conversation that's just occurred here. This is out of my realm. So we have contracted with Praxis Engineering, professional civil engineers who are also in communication currently with the city engineer. They're in dialogue about the approach that our engineer wants to take, and the city engineer has said, in concept that's okay, but when I see your plan, we'll comment on that. They'll also be probably consulting with Fred Pothast, our geological engineer, in terms of soil structure. All that plays into the design, I agree. It all also plays in with stormwater retention requirements, which now we're required to retain on site as much as feasible, obviously. So we're going to be taking water out to the street to the extent that the city engineer feels the street can handle that water. That's another issue. Where does it go once it goes in the street? Is there capacity downstream to manage that water? That's been an issue before. So it's a little complicated, but it will be figured out.
Does that reassure you to some?
As long as we get the engineers, to look into it and agree.
They're all talking to one another.
Yeah, okay, good.
Someone with more degrees than I have. Okay.
I've got a question. I was over there on that site today, and if you look at the north corner.
Mike, I can't hear you.
Sorry. I was on the site today, and if you look at the northwest corner, if you stand there, and then you look back, and then where that sidewalk from the neighbor is. Okay, you know, the neighbor just to your
Yes.
north?
Uh-huh.
Okay, there's a sidewalk there.
Right.
Are you guys planning on continuing that sidewalk at that same height?
The sidewalk will be continued, but the grades for that sidewalk elevation have not been set yet. So that's also a factor in terms of our drainage as well.
Because,
Same company, same engineering firm is doing street design and drainage.
okay, because just from a visual, you know, I can't see how you can put anything there without fill on the west side of that lot, because that is definitely higher. And any kind of drainage is going to go west, not, I mean, you look at the lot right now, it's kind of flat and draining, not draining. Anyway, so I don't really see how you can build without putting fill there to elevate that, to drain it that way. That's one concern. So the drainage, you know, just to assure somebody, because you have an engineer looking at it, still the laws of physics apply in Morro Bay. And the other issue is on-site drainage. Where are you proposing, like, they proposing to dig a pit and putting in gravel and then just having it on-site?
Yes.
Near the street?
That's that's partial solution to the drainage plan, is to have they're usually 4 to 5 feet deep with rock fill, filter cloth, drain pipe from either roof water or some other water into that area to help absorb it into the ground. So that's that'll be part of the solution.
Okay. Here's my concern, and this is like a twofold, because it goes to staff and it goes to you at this point in time. We have a stormwater management plant that was developed like 7 years ago, but with current science, it needs to be brought up. However, even with that pit, if you put it on there, because we have an adjacent sewer line, if you put in your drain there, okay, so if we don't have an ordinance that says you can't pull over a sewer easement, you're going to put a drain on site. What is a possibility is when that drain undermines the bedding of our sewer line and then compromises our integrity of our sewer system on West Street. My feeling is that really the only solution is, and I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, but either request a drainage easement if that's possible and drain it down the bluff, or put it out, put fill in and drain it toward the street. But the way I when you look at it, you're going to have to drain it someplace, and it's not, from an elevation standpoint, it's not adding up from what I see.
I appreciate your concerns. I think at this point, though, we need to let the engineers work on this solution to the satisfaction of the city engineer. I know that they'll take into consideration your remarks this evening as part of that.
I mean,
Well, that's kind of putting the carriage in front of the horse, though. We got to have these things if we're going to make intelligent decisions on what you're going to build there. If you have to put fill in, then your house is going to, you're already pushing the envelope.
Yeah, we're not proposing fill. It's not going to be a fill site.
Well, but this is the drainage plan is a huge issue, because I'm sitting here and it's like part of the representing the public's infrastructure, public's concerns. And I appreciate, all the things that you do, but we have to look at it from as it integrates as a project into the city's infrastructure, is all I'm saying.
it seems to me that there might be a number of solutions or possibilities that we haven't even talked about here. I mean, the one thing that occurs to me is the potential for rainwater recycling. Using a tank, an underground tank, something along those lines that would reduce the amount of runoff. So It seems to me that it's a process that needs to be still worked through.
I mean, our engineering division has reviewed these and provided conditions for the project that are, that address these things. They're requiring them to design the plan. They're requiring them to comply with the city's stormwater management requirements. They've gone out and looked at the site. They've prepared conditions, and because this is the preliminary review portion of it. You're looking at architecture and compliance with site planning standards. When all that's okay, then they bring it in and bring in their structural drawings and come up with their engineered plans for as it relates to drainage and so forth. So that's typically how this works. That's handled at the building permit issuance timeframe, and our engineering division has already looked at them and added conditions that address these types of things. We've talked to the city engineering division prior to this meeting, and they had no concern related to any of the items that have been raised here. So they said there's things that you design in the normal course of putting together plans for a home. So I mean, I wouldn't.
Scott, what I'm concerned about also, because we don't have those details here right now, that it'll get past the appeals process or the deadline for appeals, and the adjacent neighbor, the downslope neighbor, which will be affected by it, won't have been able to see those plans before they're approved, so he won't have any input on this. So that's my big concern right now, because what you're talking about is you're talking about surcharging a 24-foot retaining wall.
That's basically against all of our design standards and probably the law. I kind of wish Rob Liebig were here right now, but there's no way we would be approving a drainage plan or a building that was obviously going to surcharge or undermine an adjacent retaining wall.
Yeah, and the one thing you do have to keep in mind, I think, is that it's very, very much in the interest of the applicants to be conservative in this, because they would bear a huge liability if they were to do otherwise. In other words,
it just seemed like if there could be some communication and between this, so that if a interested party could have a look at this just to review it while it's still in the process, so they could appeal it if there is a problem.
Oh, I think we can probably deal with the issue if you'd like. We can add a condition that we specifically address through the design of the drainage plan, and to ensure that it doesn't surcharge the wall below. I think that's fine if you want to add that condition. I don't think that's an issue, and then it's here, and that's something that the engineering and public works divisions are going to have to look at.
Okay. That's my biggest concern. That is my concern. So
I have no issue adding a condition like that.
Okay, great.
and it just kind of emphasizes it. I mean, it emphasizes what the requirement is.
I mean, we're all talking about it, but I mean, it's fair enough. I mean, we could all go someplace else, and then people wouldn't otherwise know unless they look back at the minutes for the meeting. So put the condition in there, then there's no question what the issue was, and it'll be addressed, and it'll be addressed specifically so that the folks down below can see how that was being addressed. Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. Okay.
And we're okay with a condition like that. I would just remind the commission that we have a letter from a licensed professional engineer that says there will be no surcharge on that wall anywhere near it. So appreciate the conservative concern, and that is, as pointed out, that's a concern of ours as well. But
well, this letter is for the retaining wall, not surcharging the wall with additional load. It doesn't talk about runoff or water intrusion.
well, it is talking about the wall that is the neighbor's wall that he's concerned about. That's the retaining wall that supports his building.
Okay.
That's specifically to what that is.
Okay, great.
How can I'm an engineer as well, okay, mechanical. How can you say that there would be no surcharging on a wall when you haven't even inspected the wall?
The condition of the wall is in this case is not particularly relevant, and I don't mean to be crass about that, but the angle of influence, which is 45 degrees off the bottom of the footing of the proposed house, doesn't come near the wall. So it's not affecting the wall. So the condition of that wall, if it hit the wall somewhere, yeah, then there's some concern.
But
So you're saying the
force-
footing doesn't have an effect on it?
The force vector, just a little bit of structure. So where that rear exterior wall hits the ground,
Yeah,
and the bottom of that footing, there's a line of influence, a force vector at 45 degrees downward.
okay.
And if that hits the wall anywhere, then you have some concern. This doesn't come near it.
Okay.
There is no influence. When our engineer, both our engineering geologist and our structural engineer both agree.
Okay.
So
But how
that's
does,
not an issue.
okay, but when you compound that with the drainage plan,
Well, remember, our drainage is going out to the street. Some is being handled on site, but there's some ratio of water going to the street, some going on site that has to be there based on your stormwater retention plan. So the city engineer has to find that balance point, and it's based also on soil capability. This is very sandy soil. It's going to perk straight down. It's likely not going to spread out. It's not a clay lens. It's sand. So
I think we're sort of talking about two different issues, though. I mean, we're talking about weight, I think, which is adequately addressed, at least to my satisfaction, by this letter, and then we're talking about drainage, which we sort of have a way forward for that. So,
but these are integrated issues.
I would just say, just lastly, I'm sorry to dominate this, but the project, a couple of lots to the north that was built 5 or 6, 7 years ago, had the same sort of drainage design solution that we're talking about now. They have a pit. They have all their surface water, roof water, all the water is going out to either the pit or to the street. And that design was really vetted and thoroughly gone through by the city engineer. So something similar to that approach is going to be used here.
okay, thank you. Any further questions for the applicant? So then we'll close public comment, bring it back to the commission for discussion. Do we have any volunteers to lead off?
Well, just my concern that we include that clause that the water drainage, and I'm not worried about the angle of repose of the slope. That's perfectly stable and they're far enough back. But what I'm concerned about is about 16 feet down from these boring logs, you have a compacted, highly compacted sand, which does form a lens that the drainage can hit and then run off. And so that would hit right in the middle of the neighbor's wall. So I'm comfortable with if the engineers conclude that, that this won't be a problem, and the adjacent landowner has a chance to review the plans prior to some point where he couldn't get past an appeals process, that I would be happy with that.
I could suggest some language to Public Works Condition Number 2, which reads, as part of plan submitted for building permit, provide a drainage plan for the site demonstrating that it does not allow concentrated flow of stormwater toward the bluff and complies with the applicable drainage requirements of the bluff development standards cited. And this would be additional language, and does not surcharge the retaining wall at 1150 Front Street.
Okay.
Is that it? Richard?
And, okay, so we're gonna not surcharge a retaining wall. How are we gonna know if it fails, then we know it's surcharged, right? So is the city gonna take, like, the liability if that's not true, or?
No, the liability would be on the owner.
Well, how are we gonna know that? I mean, how do you verify? It's like putting something, how are you gonna know that it's not surcharging it? I'm,
They're gonna look at the soils that are present on site, because we already have a soils report.
Okay.
And it's gonna tell them how that property drains.
okay,
Mr. Stevenson, it was talking about there being sand. I haven't read the soils report, So I can't really speak to what it says. But if it's not it doesn't have sufficient information to tell us where the water will go as it relates to the stormwater design that they come up with at the site, then they'll have to amend it to address that. And they've gone out and probably, if they have a soils report, done test borings, and that probably can tell them where the water's going. If not, they can do some additional testing to quantify what happens with it. Because right now, the site's got a couple of small houses on it, and all the water that just fell today, a lot of it's concentrated on that site and going down, and it's soaking into the bluff face and coming out somewhere. So my guess is they can have a pretty good idea about where it's going. I mean, just as a result, I mean, it's not like it's a condition that they don't see. I mean, it's happening right now, and it's soaking into the ground, as we speak. So water's going somewhere, and it doesn't seem to be creating a problem for their hotel. If it was, they would come and see me if it was, because they'd want to be fixing it. So, and that hasn't happened.
Okay, but when we put a piece of property in here, now we've concentrated, it doesn't perk throughout the whole property. We've concentrated that flow someplace, and what you're saying is that's on Public Works?
And the conditions specifically address that, talking about concentrated flows, and you can't concentrate them onto adjoining properties. When we are having water that comes off the site, it has to be metered. I mean, that type of thing. So those are all things that go into review of the stormwater plan for water that's coming off the site and water that's staying on it.
The other thing, Scott, is it normal practice to have a plan and not a drainage plan attached?
We do not get drainage plans up front. I would say we get them at the time of building permit issuance. That's pretty typical, because that's when the design is mostly finalized from. This is where it's going to be located on site, and those are part of the submittal requirements that come along with submitting an application for a building permit. It's like we don't get structural drawings up front. You don't look at a big old set of plans that's got all the structural components of it too, because those things can change. It's expensive to do that work up front, and then the planning commission can take a look at it and decide, we'd like you to change that. Well, changing architectural drawings is, simplistic, erasing lines, moving them around. You change structural drawings, that's expensive. Re-engineering your stormwater plan because you had to reconfigure your house is also expensive, and so it wouldn't take place until that building permit, time frame.
Well, what's unique here is that we got only one side that can handle the stormwater, the front side, right? We can't put any concentrated flow down the bluff, right? Even with a drainage easement or whatever, we couldn't get it, right?
Correct. I mean, that's not a lot different than most. Our bluff development standards have that. But most lots that get developed are pushing whatever water that's allowed to drain off the site towards the street. Typically. Right. I mean, there are some exceptions that we have out there because we have some oddly shaped lots and some street ends and things that aren't completed. But mostly that's what you see, is you have things graded to drain out to the street oftentimes. So that's a pretty common practice.
Jerry.
We allowed the applicant to speak and answer questions. Would you mind opening up public comment? I think the neighbor might want to speak on this.
Sure. We'll reopen public comment for purposes of hearing Mr. Beeman.
Thank you very much. I'm not an engineer, but it would seem that the example that you made doesn't hold water. Right now, the drainage is all coming on open, it's all open, and it's not coming down on hard surfaces. When it's coming down on hard surfaces, it's going to accumulate and it's got to go somewhere. We just are concerned about our early 60s property below us, and we don't want to have issues with that. It would seem to me that understanding the drainage plan would be fundamental to approval, especially in a situation like this. Further, you made an example of the property just to the north of it. That also, excuse the expression, doesn't hold water. There's nothing below it. In this case, there is something below it. And we have a 16-unit hotel, actually 17-unit hotel. We have a restaurant. We have people there. We also have a big investment in our real estate, and we're concerned about the safety and integrity of our property. So I think that's worth consideration. Further, in the proposed amendment, or whatever the correct verbiage is, you said that there would not be any, that the drainage wouldn't cause any problem, but there was no opportunity I didn't hear any opportunity for us to look at it or to see if we were in agreement with that. It would seem because we're impacted by this, we should have some voice in it. I encourage these guys. I wish them all the luck in the world, but I don't want to affect our property. That's basically it. Thank you very much.
So we've reopened public comment. Would anyone else, please?
I built that house, and the plan was this, to take all the water from the back to the front, then go to the basement.
Right. I don't think we have a problem allowing the neighbor to look, if he wants to peer review the plan, if he has a licensed engineer that's understands what we're doing and can look at that and peer review it as it's going through the city process, I don't see a problem with that. That we're confident that we're going to be designing this to take water that goes down onto impervious surface, the house, and any hard feature is going to go out to the street, and it's not going to impact. So any rainfall we see now that's not hitting on impervious surface, it goes into the ground, is what's historically been happening, and that's going to continue to happen. But what impervious surface water will be managed, and it's going to be managed to the satisfaction of your city engineer or something else like that. So I'm just, we're kind of on ground that we're all kind of a little unfamiliar with. We're not licensed engineers. We're not licensed engineering geologists. So we're kind of, I think the proper thing is what your director indicated. Let's let the engineers work this out. And I don't see a problem. I think there are solutions to mitigating this stormwater runoff that'll be managed professionally and competently.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
Hello. Hello. Is this, am I verbal? Can you hear?
Name? Could you
My
give us
name
your
is Frederick Joseph Beam. I'm a resident of Morro Bay. And as it has been stated in the geological report, this structure is being built on sand. The first two structures were 1 stories. They're not putting a lot of weight on the land. This is 2 stories, cement. It's putting a lot of weight up there on that bluff. The stories around it, you're putting a lot of 2 stories up there. You're putting a lot of weight up there on a structure that's made of sand. If you look back into the history of another structure that was built on sand, the famous Tower of Pisa, Leaning Tower of Pisa, because it was built on sand. You're putting a lot of weight on a sand bluff where you're draining off, and I'm also concerned about water usage, how many bathrooms and sinks are in this, but I'm more concerned about building on sand bluff, putting a lot of weight on a sand bluff. I'm also concerned about the people that live below the sand bluff. I'm scared. I'm very scared about this issue.
Thank you. Any other comments at this time? Okay, seeing none, we will close public comment, bring it back to the commission once more. And I believe, Richard, you've still got the floor if you want it. But let me just ask a question. Would you be opposed, or would it be would it be a difficulty if we simply notified Mr. Beeman when the plans are available so that he could come in and take a look at them? And
Completely happy to do that. I have no issue with that. I mean, I always want to be, have people have the opportunity to review whatever plans we have going on. I mean, so yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't treat this any differently.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I mean, I think this is going to end up being an engineering problem. I mean, and I'm certainly not qualified to sit here and, propose a solution or even really to determine if the solution is adequate. But we do have people on the city staff who know how to do that.
I don't have a problem with that, and I concur that we should notify the, Mr. Beeman when the plans are available so that he could have them peer reviewed, so that he can be comfortable about this too. And, the only thing I know, like I said, I'm not a geological engineer, but I could see a potential problem here. And I think that's what we just need to bring up for the community's sake.
we can certainly add even more to that condition. This is we're going to notify Mr. What was his last name? I'm sorry.
Peter Beeman.
Beeman. Sorry, I apologize. Mr. Beeman, and we can add that into the condition. So anybody that knows also knows we're doing the extra review to make sure what we're looking for related to drainage, and that we're notifying him when those documents are in our hands.
Great.
I'm completely happy to do that.
Great.
Okay. And so, Mr. Beeman, if you can either leave some contact information tonight or come by the development department at your convenience and let us know how to get in touch with you.
I'm sorry. If I can, maybe one last comment. I'm a little concerned about the question of the structural integrity of Mr. Beeman's wall. I think that's an unknown, and I'm a little concerned that we're sort of walking down a path here where there may be some implied fix or liability and we don't know the condition of that wall. I think it's only fair if there's some review of the plan, we should have an understanding if there's a potential effect on that wall, we should understand the integrity of that wall. So.
Well, that was my point. Your engineer says there's no surcharge, but you haven't even looked at the wall.
Well, the point is that the surcharge from the buildings do not do not come near the wall. There's not a load on the wall. But we're talking about stormwater now, sort of a different picture of drainage impacting that, and this is going in a direction that I'm a little uncomfortable legally where you're implying. And so if we know that there's a problem with that wall, that ought to come out. I think it's just kind of a question that's hanging out there.
Okay. Thank you.
I think we have our path here, that we have the drainage plans are produced, engineered and produced. The adjacent landowner gets notified. He can peer review them, and then at that point, he should have the opportunity to either appeal it or comment on it to the building department. So I think we have our language in.
Right, and I would like to make it clear that we have no information about the integrity of the wall whatsoever. All we're really talking about here is where the water goes. Okay, that's all we're talking about, and potentially. I mean, you have to realize potentially if the situation now is that the soil is sandy, which it is, and the water is percolating into the sand, this drainage plan could in fact reduce the amount of surcharge on the wall, because the water will instead of hitting the sand, will hit the roof, go down the drain pipe and out into West Street, or into the retention pond. So, I think all we're saying here is that we just want to pay extra attention to the drainage from the site as it goes through the process.
Well, that may be so, but when you move that water to the back, okay, And so you're saying, oh, okay, now it's going down here, now it's going to have potentially impact. It's going to impact our infrastructure a lot more. Now, everybody talks about not being an engineer. I'm a wastewater collection grade 4 operator, and we have these tests, and what is systematic through our city now is infrastructure that's crumbling. Now, if we divert all this flow into the street, I would like to see if, one of the things, if we're going to do that, I would like to see it in writing that the Public Works Department has no problem with pooling stormwater over an easement. Put it in writing. And also that, because they don't, right? So we don't have a problem draining all our water over a sewer easement. Because this is an I&I problem. This is, when I look at it like, oh yeah, this is just a little project. But if we're just looking at it like little Montessori peanut projects, right? And just looking at one little peanut, when you're looking at, we got to look at it the big picture. The big picture is we're draining all this water onto West Street. There's a swale. It's a compounding problem. And so when I look at it, I'm looking at it like that water is going to go someplace. It's going to be moved from here to there. Now it's drained onto the street or drained in a basin. Now that drainage basin is going to affect your main sewer line because it's going to soak right underneath it if that's the way your direction is, And so we have to look at it holistically. We have to look at it, how it affects not only this one little project, but how it integrates to the rest of the system.
Right.
Our engineering division is not going to make approvals to projects that are going to damage city infrastructure. They're aware of the situations we have all over town. We have the sewer master plan. It identifies areas where sewer pipes and those things need to be repaired and fixed. I mean, there's pipes all over town that need that additional work to be done. But they're not going to direct stormwater into an area that's going to damage city infrastructure. And again, we're talking about subsurface material that's sand. So they're talking about it spreading out. Seems to be a little unlikely to me, but it is something that they review. So I'm fairly confident that this is something that will be part of their overall review when they review the stormwater plan. I mean, this is what they're supposed to be doing. It's their job.
Yeah, they are supposed to be doing it, Scott. And we're supposed to have a updated sewer master plan, and we're supposed to have an updated sewer stormwater management plan, and that hasn't occurred. And this is what it kind of goes back to like when we had that cell tower thing. We're building infrastructure, right, without the tools for you guys to use. We need to have the current science, current tools to be used. Right now, we have to... I just can't get my head around how you're going to approve a project without a drainage plan on a sandy bluff. How you can ask us to approve it.
It'll have a drainage plan. I mean, they're going to develop.
But it doesn't have one today.
No, and with all due respect, this is not the body that should be dealing with that, Richard. I mean, you're an exception. You have a lot of technical knowledge, but the rest of us, you could hand us a drainage plan and we would have really no idea what to look at, But like I say, there are experts on the staff who do this all the time. They do it for a living, and all we're asking, all we're saying really is we have concerns about this. When you do your thing, when you evaluate this plan, please respect those concerns. And I don't know what more we can do.
Okay, well, maybe the language we could put in is that the Public Works Department won't have an issue with putting stormwater over a sewer easement because that's where it's going to go. And also, if a on-site drainage plan is put in, that in writing, that the Public Works Department feels that there's going to be no undermining of a sewer line. Because the second one I could agree with. The first one, I don't think I could agree to that. I don't think we could agree that there's no problem with putting a drainage Well, that's what's going to
basin
happen.
over.
That's where it's going. It's going to go right over a sewer easement. And if we don't have an ordinance to address that, then we shouldn't have a problem.
But it might, or it might not. I mean, as I understand it, the people, when they look at this in detail, may say exactly what you're saying. You can't put that basin there. They may say you have to do something different, but they may say you have to put it. It all has to go onto West Street. They might say that you have to build a rainwater recovery tank. They may, whatever. But we don't have. I don't have the expertise to make those kind of decisions.
Well, here's my concern. Okay, when you look at that lot, the only way I can see it is if you put fill on the front end, drain it, and then extend that sidewalk with a gutter, right? And then you just run the rainwater in the gutter, not over the sewer line, along the front. That could work, but you're going to have to put fill in. That's going to affect the height of your house.
Just, excuse me, Scott, is Public Works going to review the stormwater drainage plan, and
That's their job.
they're going to review it for impact on our city utilities, correct?
They review it for impacts on everything that's adjacent, or any impacts that the drainage system could have on the adjacent properties.
Okay.
We look at it for all those things.
So I think we're going to get the review that you're looking for, Richard. So that's as a standard process. So I think your concerns are going to be addressed.
And that could be a solution. They could come up with it. I just don't personally have the expertise to come up with an alternative, nor really to evaluate an alternative proposed by somebody else. I just don't want to take on that role because I'm not competent to do that. Michael, why don't we give you a few words? We can come back to you.
No, I'm good.
Well, I was away when this was first brought forward, but I did review the information online and listen today. And I think the southern property shows the diagrammatic stormwater management pit about 125 feet away from the bluff edge. So that's about from where we are out into the picnic tables out there. So if people are familiar with this room that would be watching, that it's a significant distance. So I'm not so sure that the pit solution in and of itself is not something that can't be managed. And the idea that structurally things shear at a 45-degree angle. So that 45-degree angle from the bottom of the footing is not going to impact the structural capability of that wall. I think that's pretty significant. The thing I am disappointed about is if it's a 2,800 square foot house, we're talking about something that's at least $550 to $300 to $750,000. I don't see photovoltaic. I don't see gray water. I don't see stormwater retained through water recycling on site. It concerns me that we put stone veneer flying, feet off the ground that has to be contained, and it's disturbing for me to hear about engineering of the project for costs when you've got stone veneers, which I think are kind of crazy in this climate and seismic situation. So my concerns are more, I just wish when we had large houses we built a different kind of thing out there instead of the claim that it's not a large developer house. It's acting like a large developer house instead of somebody in an area that it's challenged by infrastructure. But that's really not our purview to require those things. But I'm disappointed in it. So I'm basically okay to put it forward. I would like to see the siding on the whole house. I think the partial stucco looks very odd, and I think you'll see it from below. The contrast between the white and the dark, I'm usually not one to be concerned about color, but I'm concerned that when we look at the bluff top image, the contrast between the white trim and the darker tones that they've got, I I think is something we don't need to call attention up there, but I'll see if my colleagues have any concern about that. I can't see any other major problems. I was looking to see the potential for a granny unit. I was looking to see the potential for other ways the site might be impacted in the future, and I think this is kind of built out. The driveway and things like that suggests there aren't many ways to build into the front. So I think what we're seeing is what we're going to get. But I totally understand the concern of the neighbor. There's also the theory that you could go on that when you build a large retaining wall, you should be retaining anything that's behind there, including the kind of moisture that would be building up behind your retaining wall. So there's also a burden, no pun intended, on the owner of the wall that he's not impacting anything up above. So my concerns are largely more aesthetic and impacting our sustainability practices that we accept without challenge here on large houses.
Okay, I have a couple of 2 or 3 points. I would agree with many of the things that Michael said. However, a couple of things I'd like to bring up. The first one is I'd like to go back to the rear wall because it's important. I think it's important that be moved back for a couple of reasons. One is the geologic reason that was brought up. The second, when I looked at it, it says 3 feet above grade. Grade at that point is 42.5 feet. The grade for the backyard appears to be about 44.5 feet. So you're talking about, from the house side, a wall that would be 1 foot tall, with a very, very steep slope behind it. So if that wall were to stay where it was, I really feel it needs some kind of a safety railing or something, because, yeah. So from not only from the geologic point of view, but also from the safety point of view, I just feel strongly that needs to be moved. The other thing is the idea of what's happening in that neighborhood in a couple of spots is basically the enclosed front yards. With very high fences, or not, 4.5 foot, 5 foot fences in some case, with gates across the driveway. I don't know if those people are keeping goats or what, but I just hate to see a neighborhood close itself off like that, wall itself off like that. I would be in favor of a condition limiting walls in the front yards to maybe 3 feet. I have no problem with a 3 foot wall. I understand what they're saying about people parking in their front yards, but I really would not like to see it closed off the way some of those projects have been. The third point, and this is really not for the applicants, the third point I'd like to bring up is traffic. When I was out there looking around today, this is really for the city. A left turn onto West Street would be, from coming up from the Embarcadero, would be suicidal. There really ought to be a no left turn sign there someplace. I wanted to go that way, and I said, nope, I'm not going to take that chance. The landscape plans, I think to me, the most important view of these houses, really the most public view of these houses, is going to be from the Embarcadero. And despite the fact that there are some details that distinguish the two of them and some color patterns, I hate the thought that they're going to look similar. I want to use the word cookie cutter. as a term for what we're trying to avoid. So when the landscape plans come forward, I really would like to see them used as an aid to distinguish the two houses. Right now, they're identical, virtually identical. And I'd like to see that changed so that the landscaping helps differentiate the two houses rather than making them seem more the same. So those are kind of my points. The only one, I guess, to throw out before the commission on that is the idea of not allowing a driveway gate or a tall wall in the front yard. I don't know. That's just my personal feeling. I don't know how the rest of the commission feels on that.
If I'm not mistaken, we've conditioned a number of projects to be non-gated. I think we've done that consistently on projects. I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I echo the views of Michael and Dr. Taft, and I would concur on the gating. I think that should be almost a standard condition unless somebody can prove that there's a reason they absolutely need it. I just don't think that's the community we want to live in. And I also have a real concern. I have a real concern about these houses being cookie cutter and basically, similar, but I think I brought this up on the first meeting was about, I think this is what we need to look at. And I think we're even reviewing that tonight on our compatibility architectural reviews, that when we have lots adjacent to each other, that they be unique, that the plan should be unique. I understand why you want to build two in a row. There's cost savings, and but on a house this size and this prominent, I think they need to have their own character. But we don't have anything to work with on this right now, so I don't have any method to engage them on this anyway. So,
Whitney, can you go back to the slide of the view from the Embarcadero?
Is this the slide you were thinking of?
Yeah, that simulation really doesn't show much in the way of landscaping, which could make a difference, I suppose.
Yeah, my concern, again, when I look at that is the one on the right has that high contrast between the darks and lights, and I think that's a little odd looking. Only because it is something that's above one of our prime pieces. I mean, it's not the style per se that concerns me. And usually we don't have that much concern about color because we're not, it could change over time. Somebody down the line just comes in and repaints something. I think the massing of the structures as the bluff fills in is going to be similar. No one's going to really move away from that kind of massing. It's going to be one story, and then it's going to go to two. So I think you'll see that kind of pattern up there.
Yeah, I thought quite a bit about the issue of the similarity between the two, and I guess I sort of came to the conclusion that it wasn't such an issue that we needed to ask them to redesign it, or but I do think that wherever we can take the opportunity, such as with the landscaping, to to help make them more individual, that we should take advantage of that.
On the landscape plan, there's a manzanita in the back, in the yard toward the bay. And I was trying to imagine what that impact is on the resident next door, because one of the things we've talked about is when we have the properties that have an opportunity to impact the views of a neighbor or something like that, trying to lessen the impact of what's done. So actually, if I'm not sure how tall manzanita gets, I'm mature, are we 6, 7 feet? You know, but it might be enough to impact the neighbors with their lateral views up. Because I think there's something, you know, I'm trying to remember down toward the park at the other end of the Embarcadero, we've got a lot of trees and things up there, and up here we're sort of on a knoll that doesn't have any mature landscaping on the bluff itself. And they come off appearing totally differently from each other, and I wouldn't want to start implying that we need a lot of landscaping up there. I think in a way, like I say, keeping the buildings simpler in the palettes and things like that is actually let them just blend in away from the bluff instead of calling attention to each other might be the better strategy. You know, so even though you've got a blue building in the front and a blue building to the side, and then this one's coming in as kind of a blue-gray kind of tone on the southern building, I think it's the white that's popping things out that makes me more concerned. I wish it was a little bit more monotone on that. But I'm good with some of the things Dr. Teft wanted to add that Jerry was talking about.
Whitney, is there a bluff standard that requires a side fence to step down on the bluff side the same way it does on the street side?
No. In fact, in Morro Bay, the maximum height for a solid fence is 3 feet at the front property line all the way to the setback, which in this case would be 15 feet from West Street. The wall should not exceed 3 feet.
But then on the bluff side, on the west side, these properties could build a 6'6" fence all the way to their property line, correct?
There's no restriction against that unless you condition it. This is in the Embarcadero area, remember, between Surf and Anchor, where you can build the whole front of the bluff face. You could go up and over the bluff, essentially.
Okay. Seems like that would be a huge impact on both the view from the Embarcadero and the neighboring views from their houses. So,
well, as a practical matter, views for the occupants of the houses wouldn't necessarily want a 6-foot fence right at the back of the property line.
I know, but I know, but I'm thinking more of fingers on the side, the side lot, so that they,
okay, the side property lines, yes. That can be. There's no lesser requirement, and our standard requirement is 6 feet 6 inches.
Okay.
Unless you choose to condition it otherwise.
Okay.
But remember, I assume that this 5-foot setback from the bluff that was recommended would include the side fence as well as the fence going the other. I mean, weight is weight.
But they could still build it 6 foot 6 high.
Right, but it'd have to be 5 feet back. But
so I just want to point that out. I don't know if that's a concern to the commission. I don't. So. Yeah.
Hey, Winnie, on this report from this engineer, Earth Systems, on the first page, in the first page, second paragraph, he states that the site is generally flat with a slight slope to the east. The location and disposition of utilities on and adjacent to the site are unknown.
I'm sorry, where are you?
I'm on the first page.
Page
of,
1?
Yeah, page 1 of the Earth Systems report.
Oh, I see where you are. I got it.
And in the second paragraph, like the third sentence. Anyway, I mean, we know I assume that this is 2 lots, right? With 2 sewer laterals, 2 water meters, so we know where the utilities are, right?
We don't necessarily know. These houses were built, I believe, in the 1950s sometime. This lot was developed kind of as one site with an initial larger, not so large, like 1,000 square foot house, and a smaller little house. They could be sharing a water line. They certainly could be sharing a sewer line. That would be allowable. It's
Yeah, but if
not
you-
absolutely certain. They would be required to video any sewer to be retained, but my suspicion is they will be doing all brand-new utilities. And
Well, then it's possible that they'll be adding another sewer line to the sewer main, right? If you're going to have 2 separate houses, correct?
it's possible if there aren't 2 there already, correct?
Right, if there's not 2, I mean, these are the kind of things I think that I kind of should know, right? I mean, if you're going to approve a house, it better have its own sewer line to the sewer main.
Well, that's a requirement if it's on a separate lot.
Wouldn't have to.
Oh, and Scott's saying,
Yeah.
if you look on the site plan,
Okay.
on sheet A1, the utilities are shown as
Okay.
proposed.
Okay, so I just wanted
I mean,
to
we
verify
Yeah.
that, so we do know this is not correct, then.
Yeah, they're shown on sheet A1. They show the approximate locations and where they would be brought onto the property as well. Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
So where water and sewer connections would be made, and
Yeah.
approximately where they'd be brought onto the subject properties.
okay, so basically, we do know where the location of the utilities are.
Well, I think maybe when Earth Systems went out there, they might not have had this site plan,
Oh, okay.
potentially. I don't know when they did it. I don't know when the report was done. April.
April
So I don't
13th,
know. I mean, it
2015.
seems like maybe if he didn't know, he didn't have this plan. I'm
Okay.
making an assumption, but
Okay.
if he wrote that, I
Okay.
would say he didn't have
Okay.
a plan in front of him.
Right.
And we frankly might not know exactly where the underlying water lines are in these old buildings. We know where they're proposing to put them.
I
Okay,
think
so,
I'm willing to make a motion for consideration.
sure.
It's, so help me out on this, wouldn't you, if I lose track here. It looks like we approve resolution number, PC 516, UPO 414, and CPO 469, with the added conditions of the concerns regarding the site drainage and the notification of the adjacent neighbor. Were there other conditions?
Prohibition of a driveway gate.
Prohibition on gating the driveway? Sorry? Well, are we talking about the bluff side or the street side? Or both. Well, the street side's 3 feet up to 15 feet or 15 to the setback. Do we want to condition the side fences?
Well, what we're seeing up there implies that nothing past the building face is visible, which I would assume has to mean something. We're not seeing fences up there, so I'm assuming that's the proposal.
And the architect is standing.
Yeah, I think we'll not
We'll not.
take further comment at this
Okay,
point.
yeah.
Our fences.
Before you take the vote, I would like to comment on suggestions.
The trade-off is privacy in the backyard versus, I mean, there is some legitimate, I guess, concern about that?
Well, the houses are conditioned to be set back from the bluff, what, 15 feet on the first floor?
25 feet.
25 feet on the first floor, I'm sorry.
And there was a condition about the, any fence near the bluff edge.
Right.
There just is no condition about side fencing, which you would expect to see some sort of sidewall or fence in this area, I would imagine. I mean, there's one existing kind of for one of the lots right now.
I could go either way on that. As far as
My personal feeling is I think it would be a relatively small visual impact from down below. It's kind of like, you know, does the public's benefit outweigh what the privacy that they have to? I kind of see it going towards not restricting that.
Yeah, the only concern I have is from the Embarcadero side, seeing 6-foot fences all the way to the bluff.
Yeah,
You know, so,
I get it.
you know, my concern would be to restrict it back maybe 10 feet, you know, 10 or 15 feet, you know, to 3 or 4 feet. But that would be but I'm not,
What do you guys think?
I'm just concerned that if we have evidence in a hearing that shows a condition, I don't want to
Right.
see that condition changed. That's all. I don't see 6-foot fences going up to the bluff setback here. If they wanted those, they should have been in the rendering.
it's a valid point.
Yeah. What do you think, Richard?
If you don't mind me interrupting, I just would note that on the site plan, there's reference to some existing walls, for instance, on sheet A1 for 1147. They're saying there's an existing 8-foot, 8-inch CMU. There's an existing 6-foot, 4-inch high wall right now, which may act as a shared wall. So I just would caution that sometimes fences and walls like that are shared, and so you might be conditioning another property owner inadvertently.
Wouldn't apply.
There's it's the existing wood fence.
It's on the, what would be the south side. So,
Sure, we'll open public comment again. Yes, go ahead.
Bill Merrifield, I'm one of the applicants, and I'd like to talk about the fences just briefly. I have been in negotiation with my neighbor immediately to the south, and we intend to have a 6-foot fence, but only between the structures. Out on the portion out, which is the back of the lot, on the bluff's edge and back, I'd say about 15, 20 feet, we're going to have a 2 to 3 feet high. We've settled on a 3 feet high wall. And again, it's for privacy, and the reason they want a 6-foot wall between the two buildings for privacy. But it's going to be, like I say, much shorter, where you would be able to observe it from the Embarcadero. And I'd also like to say, while I'm looking at this, some of the color rendition is really not correct. I'm looking at a medium gray with white trim. There may be a little bit of dark blue like the garage door, just to give it a little bit more sex appeal. But it's, and I didn't want to have a blue because the place to the south, the right, is also blue. I didn't want to, again, I wanted to be different from them. And I also, Mr. Wright's place to the left is a beige, a brown color. And again, it was an idea of having something that is nautical in nature and color, but also gets away from the cookie cutter aspect as it relates to color. I'd also just like, I'm not an architect, I'm not probably as versed at some of these issues as you folks are, But I think we're greatly limited in our architecture. We got basically what are fairly narrow lots. We're talking 41, 42 feet in width. By the time you put a garage door and you put a front door in there and you put your side easements, there's not much you can change in the way of the profile. The profile might change, but in going back, they're thin, deep lots. So it really restricts what you can do. Now, I've heard some people, well, why don't you flip it over? Then if you do that, then my windows are looking into his windows. So I'm just saying there's limitations on this, and over and above the economy that we may have in some of the, the floor plan being similar, obviously. But we've done what we can, and I've made concessions to do this. There's things that I would have liked more, and I'm willing to make these concessions because I understand the concern, and I understand the need to have, we're in a premier spot, and it's important that we're attractive from down on the Embarcadero. I would also like to say that, there was some discussion about the usage of water and these being larger homes. So I'd like to, again, remind you, this is R2 property, and we could probably, or some developer other than ourselves, we plan to live on these properties, but there could be several units put on each of these lots, and that would be, I'm sure there'd be higher water usage. So I guess that's all. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay. So while we have this open, would we like to invite the designer to speak also?
Thank you, and I don't need to belabor this, but I did appreciate the comments relative to use of some landscaping features to help soften the structures, and I think we can do something like that closer to the building, some cluster of materials that will help soften that view. I think that's a good suggestion, something that we'll work with our landscape designer on. That's a good idea. The other issue was the height of the walls, which I think Mr. Merrifield explained. There was no interest in doing high walls out from the rear of the building out to the bluff. And in addition to the front setback as well, that by ordinance has to be no more than 3 feet high.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have to, I mean, I appreciate that, but the discussion is still the same because Mr. Merriweather may not own this house forever, and the next people that come in may have kids, you know what I'm saying, and have a different perspective. So,
well,
I could go either way.
Yeah, it seems like 3 feet to 15 feet setback, would be reasonable. That way you don't have 6'6" fingers of fences going out there. That's my only concern, and that would give them more privacy between the houses and privacy between a good portion of their backyards. So
then I guess the proposal is limiting the height of the fences to 3 feet within 15 feet of the
rear property line,
the bluff edge, which is
yeah. Do you have any problems with that, Scott? Any concerns?
I was actually just thinking, of what are things that you see out there, and sometimes you do get situations where, and this is, we have them around town here a little bit. I ran into them a lot, and this issue came up frequently, a lot of bluff top properties when I was in Pismo. And so this was something that was a discussion point, although we did have limitations to heights of fences in the back. And oftentimes the condition that would get added in these scenarios would be you have a solid, fence to 3 feet or whatever, because sometimes they want the windscreen so they could be clear the rest. Not smoke colored, not any of that, but they could be clear and be taller, within whatever the height limitation for the fencing here, 6.5 feet, and they would be clear and see-through. We've had conditions that were added that were like that to similar type situations. Not saying you need to add it, that was just a thought that popped into my head while you were talking about it, because this is, things that we dealt with a lot when I was in Pismo.
Yeah, I'm concerned about the solid wall more than anything else. I'd actually like to see 3-foot solid back to the bluff 25-foot setback. What they do above that, I'm less concerned about, because it just keeps it from looking like a bunker, which is my biggest concern. So many of the houses we see from the 50s have a proportion of glass to mass. We looked at this at the southern end of the Embarcadero a couple weeks ago, and the 50s buildings had a different energy code and everything else, but they have a lightness to them kind of floating up there on the bluffs. And the newer ones all look heavy. And the heavier everything looks, and so the walls surrounding everything, I think, concern me. So the 3-foot to the bluff setback I'd be happy with, and if they want to do something above that within the code, I think is fine.
I'm a little concerned about glass, seeing as that is the property line is 90 degrees to west. You could get a tremendous amount of glare off of that from a setting sun, focusing back on the Embarcadero. I know my neighbor across the street, when the sun's setting, it's 10 degrees hotter when that sun's reflecting off of his glass. So I'm concerned about having glass there.
And practically, it's kind of a nightmare. It would be dirty all the time. I mean, for a little enclosure, a patio or something, maybe so, but I mean, all the way across, for a long expanse of fence, it's...
Yeah. So yay or nay on the 3-foot to 15-foot?
Michael's going for 25 feet.
Just for the solid.
Pardon?
Just for the solid fence, that's all.
Okay.
What would your feeling be with like iron railings and things that would be not solid?
I think it would be, if it was well designed, I think it could work. I'm just concerned about the openness, and I think it does. If we had these things rendered, we could get a better sense. I mean, it's the chain link fence. I wouldn't want to see that, but that's open at least. You basically see through it. Iron fence of some kind, you basically see through it. Somebody has a dog or something, you don't want them to jump over a fence. You don't want a child, when they get a little smarter, to be able to climb over a 3-foot fence. I understand that. You don't want Richard or I climbing over the 6-foot fence from the other side either. But I think the main thing is the heaviness of the fence. That's what concerns me the most.
So like 75 to 90% see-through? That work?
Yeah, I think that's...
Yeah,
That was a standard, I didn't pull it out of the air, it's a standard I've used before.
Yeah.
That creates see-through fencing like you're talking about, that you don't get the appearance that there's solid mass there. You get the appearance that you can see right through it. So
Yeah, that'd be fine, because then if they do have a dog that they'd like to contain, that they could do that.
Yeah, I don't know, but it sounds like 90% see-through might be difficult to get enough structure to contain a child or a dog. I mean, at 75, I think maybe would work better. 90% almost means to me like cables, which doesn't do much to keep kids in.
I mean, they're 4 inches apart sometimes.
Well, yeah, maybe, yeah.
Cheese grater.
So,
Okay, that's our motion.
What was the setback that you were looking at?
I'd still go 15 foot. That gives them that.
I'll go with 15 till we see it built, and then I'll tell Commissioner Lure I think he was wrong. But
at least by the time you get 15 feet back, but because of the angle, of the bluff, you won't see much of it,
Right. That's my concern.
Okay, so we have three conditions.
Any concern about the siding? The siding on the south
Siding
unit?
issue, sure.
I concur with you. I think the siding needs to go all the way down.
I could agree with that. We have 4 conditions.
4 conditions. We have 2 separate resolutions?
Yes, we do have 2 separate resolutions, but let's just get through this.
Okay.
It'll be the same conditions for, yeah.
That was, 2. That was Public Works 2.
Doesn't have the siding on the other condition.
And the drainage conditions right on Public Works 2? Right? Oh, that was the first one, I'm sorry. I apologize.
The drainage condition, the notification of the adjacent neighbor regarding the drainage plans, prohibition of a gate at the driveway, and the 4th one was within 15 feet of the rear property line, the fence shall be no more than 75%, no less than 75% see-through.
No, any portion of the fence above 3 feet in height.
Right.
And then the siding essentially to the ground, the lap siding on both the first and second story on the sides of the building.
And that's on this site, not the next site.
That is at 1147, yes.
Okay.
Okay, so we have a motion from Commissioner Lohr.
I'll second.
Do we have a second?
Yeah, we have a motion and a
I'll
second.
second.
Is there any discussion on the motion?
On the Public Works conditions, we're putting in that that's not going to surcharge the neighbor's wall, correct?
Right, we added language to Public Works condition number 2 to that effect.
Okay. Is there, is it appropriate to put in, would it be appropriate in here to put in that any drainage plan will not adversely affect public utilities? The reason why I'm continue to bring this up is because we're a planning commission is different than a public works advisory board. As an advisory board, they just advise, and so that's why I'm kind of like.
If the commission wants to add it, it's what we do. So
Yeah.
I'm happy.
Okay.
I'm okay. The basis of the language that you provided, I'm okay adding it if you'd like. I don't have an issue. If you want to amend the motion and you get them to accept it, I'm happy to put it in there, and I'll explain to the Public Works Department where it can, why it was added, because it was concern noted about it. I can do that.
It's just, I guess it's just a matter of emphasis, just sort of.
That's exactly how I was taking it, yeah.
If you guys wouldn't mind, I wouldn't mind seeing that.
Okay, I'll amend my resolution.
Scott, can I ask a question? This is a Public Works question, but, West Avenue at some point may have other types of development across the street. Is there ever a situation where you change the profile of the street from this V kind of thing that's an alley to a
I would say, I would say it's probably not the ideal situation from a drainage standpoint of a street. I mean, you typically wouldn't design it this way. So yes, streets over time can get reconstructed. Typically what do you see? You see the crown of the road somewhere in the center-ish, typically, where it goes in and then drains out towards the edges where you have curbs and gutters and things go out. That's sort of your typical drainage pattern, right? So yeah, you do see that happen over time sometimes. I mean, typically that's driven by, the condition of the street And then, are there issues related to drainage and things that we need to resolve? And then finally, that becomes one of the streets that we're, do we not have other ones that are more needy? Probably we have other ones that are more needy. But, as things go by and you start repairing your streets and those types of things, that is something that gets looked at because it is kind of funky and, not a typical drainage pattern. So in general, yes, that is something you'd take a look at if you're reconstructing the street.
But I think the motion addresses, that's one of our concerns, is that the city has this, and I've seen it in other places too. It's not just, this is not a totally unique situation. It is pretty common for some alleyway constructions in urban settings. But I think it's one more point that calls our attention to the nature of the bluff top as a special utility consideration, because even here there may be issues that have been brought up tonight that the state standard about stormwater runoff is well intended, but it doesn't take into account every permutation that you have, where we might have some unique ones here in the city. That it'd be nice if there was a bailout, no pun intended, clause of figuring out where some of these things might be handled differently.
So we have an amended motion. We need an amended, will you second the motion as amended?
I will.
Okay. So now we have an amended motion. Is there any further discussion on this? Seeing none, may we have a roll call?
Yes, Commissioner Lohr,
Yes.
Commissioner Lucas,
Aye.
Commissioner Sadowski,
Aye.
Commissioner Taft.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-0. And now for the next
We
resolution.
need to do that again.
Okay, I guess I'll attempt this one again. Resolution PC 616 for CPO 470 and UPO 415 for 1149 West Avenue. And I would move that we accept the previous amendments, previous conditions, except for the citing condition.
Second.
So we have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on this?
Just to clarify, we're going to put in an infrastructure issue. Okay, thank you.
And guys, before we vote, I have to do this. Does anyone have any ex parte communications to report on this item?
No.
Seeing none. Okay, then we have a motion, we have a second. May we have a roll call?
Commissioner Lohr,
Yes.
Commissioner Lucas.
Aye.
Commissioner Sadowski.
Aye.
Chairman Taft.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-0. Thank you.
Well, you guys just let me hang myself out to dry on that ex parte stuff, didn't you? Okay, it's 8 o'clock. We have one more discussion item on the agenda that may go a little bit. So I think we'll take 5-minute break here.
Not unless it gets appealed.
Okay, we're back. Moving on to our new business item for tonight. C1 is a discussion, a 6-month review of the design guidelines. I can't believe 6 months has gone by already, but here we are.
I I can't believe it either. So when we were going through the design, the development of the design guidelines, interim design, residential design guidelines specifically is the name of it, we discussed internally, at least at the Planning Commission level, that we'd return after 6 months to have a discussion about it, to see where we're at and what's going on. It's interesting. You kind of look back at the history behind where we were. We started the development of the design guidelines back in October of 2014. We took it through 9 public hearings and 1 workshop. In June of 2015, the Planning Commission adopted Resolution 2315 recommending approval of the design guidelines to the City Council, and then subsequently, in July, or specifically July 14th of 2015, the Council adopted Resolution 52-15, approving the interim residential guidelines for a period of 12 months to be reviewed at the end of that time frame and potentially continued on while we work our way through the general plan update, because it's likely that some of this information that's in our guidelines will get pushed out into either the general plan and or zoning code as we update it over the next 2 years. So what have we done since we adopted the design guidelines in July? We've placed them online. The planners will, when engaging the public at the counter or on the phone, note that we have them, make them aware of them, and tell them where they can find them. In fact, we do, in some instances, pass them out to folks as well. We do a review of them as new projects come in as part of the completeness review. Every project that's submitted through the planning division has a completeness review period of 30 days. And that's where we review it for the checklist that we have for submittals, and we review it for compliance with the city's development standards as part of that review, and we review it in conjunction, if it's a residential structure, for compliance with the design guidelines. And then finally, what we haven't been doing a lot of, and mostly because you have a lot of projects that have been coming before you that have been in the queue and predates the design guidelines, we haven't got to use them a lot in front of you. And so we've kicked around how to do that, and then you've gotten a couple of them that have come forward that have been in that interim, since July, that have come forward. And you've seen it in sort of, we've touched base on it, and it's been in a kind of a written format in a paragraph, and that didn't seem to be really useful. So one of the things I wanted to talk about this evening is maybe how, that didn't come out great, how you want to see it. This is, if you looked at it on the screen, it's actually in a table. Apparently the lines all got removed when I threw it up on the screen. But the way how it's laid out is to have it in a table and then to have it as a title, what the section specifically is. And then in the middle, you would note the criteria. I don't have any of it filled out. And then the planner, in reviewing it, would note compliance with a yes, no, or maybe, and then an explanation as to why they think that. That's just to provide perspective. And this is kind of this is a template that I've used before for design guidelines before I came to Morro Bay. So I used it in Pismo when we adopted design guidelines. It worked pretty well. It was even a format that we used before we had design guidelines when I was in Pismo, when we had a subcommittee of our planning commission that was the design review board, and they would provide comments, and we put it into this sort of format, and usually it related to what the house looked like and what concerns they had, that type of thing. So this is something I'd like you to weigh in on and give some input to about how we show this in staff reports. You see a lot of the information that we give you in table format in the staff reports, and so this would be in keeping with that. If nothing else, we could try it out, over the next couple of months. The planners are working on putting it in this, getting all of our policies into an entire table, and so they can cut and kind of paste. Right now, they're in the process of doing that now. So we should have that probably finished within the next week or two and be able to roll that out for future planning commission items that are subject to the design guidelines, and you can actually get a feel for it that way. Are you interested in that? Does that make sense? Is there a different format you'd like to see? I mean, I don't...
I think that's great. I really do. And I tell you why. I like that fact that when you put complies and then a little explanation.
Okay. Yeah.
I like it because then it's like, anybody can see why, and it kind of closes the loop. Did you do this in Pismo? Is that what you did over there?
Yeah, this is. I mean, I basically took the format that we used. We didn't have quite as many design guidelines, but we put them in the table format, and usually would put in the staff report the ones that were directly applicable. Ones that weren't, we didn't put in there. I mean, you didn't just. Otherwise, you'd have a list that's like the entire design guideline. You don't want to see that.
No.
You want to see the areas that we think that that are maybe applicable to the project, and then have us specifically call out those ones that we noticed that these are ones that you'd probably look at as it relates to the specific design. Granted, this is staff leading a little bit of the charge on that, but at least it gives you some discussion about the design guidelines and at least staff's thought process when we reviewed it. And if nothing else, it would hopefully generate, thought process on your part about, consistency or other policies that you think maybe applied that we didn't mention. I mean, that's kind of what it's supposed to do, and kind of what it served the function of was to generate discussion.
Yeah, it's concise and clear, not easy to digest.
It seems like this would be a good format for the applicants.
Yeah.
We know about the design guidelines. Applicants coming in for the first time, this would be a good review for them to see where the discrepancies are on their plans.
Yeah, I mean, we currently, when we sit down and review projects that are coming in now, and we're actually going to do some of this tomorrow with a couple projects that we've just recently got in, and we do discuss the design guidelines and the compliance and how that looks, and that's often, some of the incomplete letters that we get back. Well, at the end, the last thing that we'll talk about is the design guidelines and how the project complies or doesn't, and then suggested changes, where maybe it's not as compliant and things that they could do to resolve that. I mean, design guidelines include things like that in it. It says when you have this issue, maybe you want to do these, so it's not a stretch. I mean, it's already kind of in there, but we do kind of point that out and walk folks through it, especially those projects that are coming before the Planning Commission. Like you would have issues if you don't address some of these things. So.
That's what I would say. I really like the yes, no, but I really like the maybe, because that's telling them, if you're going to bring something before here, you have to know we're not, as staff who are fluent with this, we're not sure that the Planning Commission will see that this meets it or not. So it kind of lets them know where some of the more gray areas might be. Because I really think, in general, most of the small projects we get, to me, seem to achieve these things at a higher level than our large projects. I'm consistently always concerned from a strictly aesthetic architectural point of view, as well as this idea that the value people see is purely aesthetic in a lot of the things we're doing. I just really get disappointed we aren't seeing, especially in the large houses, the gray water, the rainwater, there's so many aspects of value that affect the way our infrastructure is going to ultimately be developed. And if we had one by one, over the course of a few years, 100 projects that started to address some of these things, we'd actually make a dent in turning some of these things around. But we just keep seeing again and again the same kind of, attitude toward some of those things. So my biggest concern is a lot of these things aren't manifest in terms of the infrastructure elements coming into what good design would be. I think we encourage them in all of our policies, but I really like the maybe, because it says, you might get comments on that.
I'd like to speak to what you just talked about inclusion of gray water systems, solar ready, policies and those types of things. So we are in the process right now. I was just discussing this with our planning commissioner to be in the process of developing goals for the 2016-2017 version of our goals. Right now we have 10 goals, 72 objectives. They were mostly supposed to be complete by July of this year. Some of them are going to be kicked forward because they either weren't funded or was something we couldn't get to, because 72 objectives with 10 goals is a huge amount. and it's proven to be a lot of work. But we've done a pretty good job. We've got a lot of things done from a city standpoint, and kind of proud of it, really. But what I was trying to get to was those are some things that are included in our next version of the goals, is to develop those policies and put them into action. So those are some of the things you're going to be seeing coming out over the next couple of months at City Council. Is we're going to have those discussion on goals, and those are in there. So should be something that you're keeping your eye on, because hopefully we'll have policies pretty soon that are going to require some of these things, and not in the not too distant future either. I mean, we have to develop the policies, but we have to develop them and implement them, and that would be part of our next series of goals. So, I mean, it's on the horizon anyway, if nothing else.
I think it's a great idea. I guess if I've heard criticisms of the design guidelines, it's people who say, oh, they're just subjective, and this sort of boils it down into, no, there's some very objective criteria that you're either meeting or not meeting, I mean, certainly there's a degree of judgment involved, but there always is, I mean.
That's why we have you guys. Okay, well, I mean, that's good. So we're going to start utilizing this format like I said, coming up here as soon as we finish getting it all in the table format so they can pull from it. So probably, over the next couple of meetings, you'll start seeing something along these lines for that. Probably not the next one, maybe the following one we'll be ready to start rolling this out. So we have to see how it works, and then we'll revisit it again, because we're gonna have this discussion about the design guidelines later on down the road, before I go back to council to request that it be continued.
So Scott, what kind of feedback have you been getting at the counter on the projects that we don't see?
Feedback has been okay. I mean, we haven't gotten much pushback on it. People will take a look at it, and usually what happens is we were already, and I think I've probably mentioned this to you, already looking at the design on houses and saying, yeah, this is problematic. You probably need to pay a little more attention to this. And they're like, well, this is an admin permit. It just needs to comply with the development standards. We're like, no, not really. And if you don't fix these types of things, what we were doing at the time is saying, look, I have all the discretion in the world that I need. I can take you to Planning Commission and we can have the discussion there in a more public form if you want, or you can address a couple of these items and make the design a little bit more cohesive, and then we'd be happy to approve it. And so normally people don't want to be put through this process. They'd rather get their permit now and be able to submit to building, because that's really what they want to do. They want to build their houses. They don't want to deal with planners. So it's usually that was usually effective. Now we have the stuff in writing that we've been telling them, and it's pretty helpful, because not only can we tell them, hey, this is an issue, but we go, here's the policy, and it says it right here. And when this was recently developed, this was vetted through, and I always give them we had 10 Planning Commission meetings on this and a workshop, and then finally it was adopted by City Council. So it was it went through a lengthy process to create it, and there is every expectation that we're going to use it, and we're supposed to be using it, and so that actually means something to people. And now that that we've been the planners, when they do speak with folks on the phone that are inquiring about, we're going to submit a plan, we want to do an addition, what have you, we point them at this. It seems to be that they're looking at it. So I think it's successful on that end of things. I think now we're really just kind of getting into the phase where most of our projects are going to start having to deal with it, as opposed to having all these ones that were in the pipeline before that maybe, didn't really have to, or had already been to Planning Commission once, or were very soon there after we adopted them going to Planning Commission, and something that had been in the pipeline for a while. These are going to be ones that have been submitted after the fact, and every expectation is that you're going to be taking a look at these when you're developing your plan. So. I didn't have a whole lot else to present other than kind of where we were at, because we haven't had a whole lot of projects where we've had, one, much angst over this, and two, a whole lot of ones that were directly applicable to it. We haven't gotten a bunch of pushback. It seems to be being received okay. We had a little bit of a problem there for a little while when we were changed to our new website. The link for it wasn't working, but now it's working again, so that's all fixed, and so people can get it right online. So that's nice. And we were discussing putting it on So people are on notice, putting it into the submittal checklist as well, letting you know that, hey, we have these, and so you should pay attention to them when you're developing your plans. That was kind of one of the next pieces to it as well. Other than that, the topic's open for discussion. If there's other pieces that you want to discuss, I didn't purposely make it very comprehensive or bring a bunch of information to the table because we haven't been using it for very long. You'd think, oh, we've had a bunch of projects, but we haven't had all that many that that we've had to deal with it, and we haven't gotten hardly any pushback. So it seems to be working okay.
A couple projects have been appealed to the council, and I'm trying to go back through my mind on those and think if any of these questions hinged on some of those appeals. If part of the appeal was some of these were too ambiguous, or if they had just been interpreted differently. And I think there were other issues involved in those in specific, because I think part of the thing is to make things happen here rather than go there, unless it's really significant. So I'm just going kind of back over the three that I'm mainly thinking about: the one up toward Black Hill, and then the one on the beach, and then
we had Toro. That didn't have anything to really do with design guidelines.
No.
I mean, that was more to do with the path, and the trail was the main focus of the appeal.
And the one down above the park, south end of town.
The boat launch.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and that wasn't, well, I mean, that had, a component of that to it, right? I mean,
It was mass.
of scale and bulk and
scale.
massing, and that's coming back, so, that was one of the things I wanted to talk to you guys about. That did go up to city council. They did make changes, and then the planning commission and the city council is sending it back to the planning commission for deliberation. So,
Yeah, I know it's not really a discussion on that, but it seemed to me when I looked at the package that was submitted to the city, it was considerably different than what we had seen. I reached out to them. I mean, we should be talking about this, but I'll tell you with the process, a little bit of the process. I reached out to them because I didn't think there was really any reason why their house should get denied. I think part of it had to do with how it was represented here. And I thought, based on what the planning commission said, you gave pretty specific direction that there was really no reason why they couldn't make some of these changes. It wasn't going to be wholesale changes to their home. And they went back and did it and agreed, and were able to address many of the things that were raised by the commission. So, but that was related to design guideline type things. So that's part's good. And then you get to see it again. And the city council was really interested in making sure that the planning commission kind of got to finish its review of things. That was great. And all it's surprising. I mean, they may be back through the loop again with appeals, but probably for different issues. Maybe not. We'll see.
It seems like, to me, some of the deficiency that we've had in the design guidelines were pretty much pointed out in these two projects tonight. Adjacent lots. How do you handle two structures on adjacent lots and keep the unique quality that we're looking for, unique architectural qualities, in the city. Also gated driveways. I don't think we address that in the design guidelines.
Yeah, there's anything in there.
There's something about the front door being available from the street, or visible from the street, or something.
We do have that. That's correct.
But we still end up.
You could stretch it.
You could stretch it. And then what we brought up before was sustainability. Sustainable construction. And so those were the items that I had on my list prior to even tonight's agenda.
Yeah.
And the things that the commission struggled with on the two that were before you this evening were the same things that internally, from a staff standpoint, that we struggled with as well when they came in. It was a lot of back and forth trying to get the plans sort of better represented, getting better renderings, getting them to show the things from where they're supposed to be. So these help us do that. And then the commentary that we get from you, requesting the three-dimensional drawings, the showing what it looks like in the landscape. I think we convey that. I mean, believe me, we tell, especially when projects have issues, we go forward and tell the applicants, like, you need to provide these things. These tell the story of what's going on. When they don't have this, you're leaving one of the tools out of the box, for the planning commission or staff, depending on what level of review it is, to make those decisions. And because that technology is readily available, it's not really a great excuse to say, well, I can't do it. Although, that's probably one of the conversations we need to have moving on down the road is how do we incorporate that into our submittal requirements, and when do we get it and when don't we? Because there's also the argument to be made that, somebody that comes in might not be a designer. They might be a contractor that doesn't have that total skill set, but has enough to where they can draw, an elevation on a single-story house to fill in where they want to do the addition and say, this will be a window, and kind of show you what it looks like, and matching roof lines and things like that. And then we probably should be able to say okay to those types of things. And you would see those if those houses were, say, non-conforming for some reason,
Right.
Then it has to come to you, and you're getting the, 350 square foot addition, for the bathroom and the closet they just added on or whatever, it's... so we probably need to have some discussion about when we get it and when we don't. So
Yeah. The other area that we kind of, just in terms of moving forward with the guidelines, into the future, the other area that we kind of didn't really settle was the whole issue of view protection, be it public view protection or private view protection. Eventually, that's still out there. Eventually, it's going to have to be, we're going to have to bite that bullet eventually.
And I think that's going to come up as part of the general plan and LCP update process. I think it has to be, because there's a lot of contextual elements that go into that. And you're looking at all of the other, like we have the resource protection, view protection areas, and how do you wrap those into that, and how do you expand it? I think there's sort of a natural fit there to get into that discussion, I think.
Yeah, well, a lot of the public view protection is going to be, we're going to be mandated by the Coastal Act to look at that,
Yeah, probably having, I think, better exhibits that show where our specific views are protected, and better descriptions, because you kind of look at the figures and you're like, I think that's here, but there's no reason it has to be that way. We shouldn't be like guessing. It should be pretty explicit, and there's no reason it can't be, because when you go to those areas, you can see right where the view is, and that should be described. It's not described, and so you're kind of like, well, on the map it looks like it's here, but when I drove out to the site and stood on that corner, well, I can see where the view is. So sometimes they're fairly evident, but it's nicer if maybe we describe it a little bit better.
Yeah, I think there's a huge difference between public views and private views protection. Where you start, the biggest problem is how do you subordinate one person's right to another person's right? Who has priority? The person that has been there for 10 years, or the person that's owned the lot for 30 years and now wants to build? So that's...
And it may not be black or white. Like I say, there's the vast majority of, quote, view protection ordinances out there are really about vegetation, when you have to trim your vegetation.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to mention. I think one of the things that troubles me is we're always going to see a net loss of trees till we come up with a city vegetation plan, that the areas that the city does have public control over, the parks and recreation areas and things, that it almost seems like to be a bird city and to actually keep some of these regenerative, tree city and have the idea of landscape that's helping our air quality and things like that. We almost have to look at a more intensive kind of planting somewhere to offset the loss that we have in general of the view situations, which I'm very sympathetic to. It's very hard to come in here and see all of this concern about staying within the height and volume things of the zoning description, but then somebody can plant a tree that obliterates something through a side yard or something like that. Well, you can tell someone, I feel sorry for you, you should have been able to anticipate the zoning envelope, but how do you tell somebody they can do anything they want to with 40-foot, 50-foot palm trees around the outside edge of their property or something? That's where I think we've got a real, even tonight, I was looking at the side yards, and they had the manzanita out there on the corner of the property, and we just talked about a 6-foot fence, but then there's going to put in 7 or 8 foot tree out there on the corner. And I'm thinking, well, the tree helps knit together the edge of the bluff, which is a good thing, but then the tree's going to get watered, and maybe that's a bad thing because the bluff's going to slide down. And maybe the birds will come, and that's a good thing, and maybe the guy next door lost his view that he had out of that house. So it's something that I think you really need a lot of good public comment until you get this kind of dialogue about what do we want to do as a city for this thing, because it will affect the way the place looks after a while, because all the trees planted in the 50s and 60s, when a lot of these houses are done, they're reaching their maturity point. You know, I know all my myoporum, about half of my myoporum are gone now.
Yeah.
And, you know, I probably had 12 or 15 of those at one point, you know, so I'm feeding my birds more, and, you know, it's an interesting thing because it affects the way the city looks. And so
And I think that ties into helping facilitate the neighborhood compatibility thing. And if we can get people dialoguing, it's kind of like that Ridgeway project you talk about, private view sharing, you know, getting people together and talking. And man, I look at neighborhood compatibility as a opportunity to dialogue with your neighbors, because you're going to be living there, you know. And if you can do a little something that's not that big of a deal, I think sure makes life a lot nicer in a nice city. I really do.
One of the toughest things to regulate.
Yeah. Especially here, we're in a city that has so many absentee owners. Yeah, it's a. So, do you see this? Do you see the design guidelines evolving, or do you see them sort of being folded into the general plan eventually?
Yes. It'll be both of those things, I think. I think that we're going to formalize the design guideline policies. I think they'll probably get added onto, and we may be doing it, you know, I mean, we had this discussion when we were going through this. Do we apply these, you know, more specifically to neighborhoods? I mean, so you're kind of fitting it at the shoe level, you know, so it kind of fits on there for the area. I think that is a natural place for these to go, into where you would develop more specific ones for the, you know, the areas that are on the heights, that are up, you know, they're up on the hills versus the areas that are down flat. There's a lot of crossover in there. We just have, you know, ones that apply to everything. So you got to sort through them and pick the ones that are applicable and work. But there's no reason they can't be specific to those areas. Like this is the group that fits the beach track. Then we can just go to those specifically, so you don't have to read through the entire, you know, book of design guidelines. You just want to do the ones that apply to your neighborhood. I think that makes a lot of sense, and breaking it up similarly to the, you know, how they did to some of the previous versions of the sign ordinance that I still need to get back to. You know, like that. There's 4 different areas there, so there's, you know, to have 4 or 5 neighborhoods in town that we, you know, detail the design guidelines to fit, I think makes sense. That may be somewhere where we go. I like that idea, really. I mean, it made sense to me when we were talking about it throughout the process, and it came up regularly. I mean, you all mentioned it several times.
Actually, doing that with the design guidelines may be a much more successful approach than the specific plans that we have now, which don't really get to the issues that the different neighborhoods have.
Yeah, those will, you know, and I see some of the, you know, those potentially going away and just being wrapped into the zoning code and LCP and whatnot, general plan policies, because there's a lot of the policies that are in those things that just, they're not functional. I don't know that several of those things, the policies and many of them really did what they had set out to do, and so they kind of failed a little bit, and maybe keeping them around and just looking at them all the time and go, oh, well, we had the idea to build an overlook over here, but we didn't put any funding mechanism in, so cool, what do we do now? I mean, that's unfortunate. I mean, having an overlook there would be really nice, but we didn't tie it to any development, so there was no like surcharge on it to get money together to really build it. I mean, that was sort of a mistake.
Well, now you're getting that $2 a linear foot.
You're right. I'm sure we could come up with something very nice for that. Yeah, I mean, there are policies like that in all of our specific plans that you just kind of you kind of scratch your head and go, okay, but how are we supposed to implement this? Or, you know, I mean, it just doesn't work. So the good thing is we're going to go through a process that's going to discuss all those types of things as far, you know, as it relates to the land use. So I mean, some of that stuff will shake out then, I think.
So any other comments about the design guideline?
No.
So we'll move on. Unfinished business, we have none this evening. I would like to bring up one item under Planning Commissioner. Yeah.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Yeah.
I've got an item too.
This is a pretty simple one. The City Council does something that makes a lot of sense to me, which is they hear the staff report, and then they hear from the applicant, and then they have questions from the council. And to me, that makes a lot of sense, because sometimes we're addressing questions to staff that really the applicant has the answer to, and vice versa. And it seems to me that if we got both of those pieces of information up front and then had our questions, it might be a more comprehensive way to go.
But then we would need to allow the public to make their comments at that time too.
No, you can just keep the public comment open at the, just allow the questions, and we don't close public comment, and then, once our questions are answered, and the truth of the matter is, that may answer some of the public's questions as well. So the way they do it is they simply they let the applicant put in their comments, and then they have questions, and then they let the rest of the public make comments. They just keep the public comment open. Just a little procedure change.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't hear any. Michael's.
I'm willing to try it. Sure.
Okay. All right, we'll give it a shot.
I guess I've just got a couple questions for Scott as far as where we are in a couple items.
Okay.
For one thing, the mobile home clarification.
I have it on the agenda for the next meeting, I think.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's either the next one or the following one, but I think it's the next one. We don't have, so it's the next one. It is the next one. It's the next meeting.
And then has there been a couple items with the harbor, the haul out facility, has there been any movement on that?
So they finalized a couple of options. They took that back to the Harbor Advisory Board, and I have to assume that the Harbor Advisory Board voted on a preferred solution, although I don't 100% know that. And then even when we were talking about future goals at the last city council meeting, leading up to the last city council meeting, Dana McClish came and was asking that stay on the radar and be brought forward to council. So I'll have to find out a little bit more about that. I'm not sure why it hasn't gone anywhere between when RRM put together the final couple of plans, options, and then they took it back to the and I don't know where it went after that. Maybe that's why Dana had indicated that at the meeting.
It seems like it would be a good point before they chose a specific plan that we could, as a planning commission, should take a look at that to see how it fits into the overall, the rest of the community. So
I will reach out and talk to Eric Endersby and find out where we're at with that, because when Dana brought it up at the last city council meeting, it was the goal session that we had before it actually. He had requested that be kept on their agenda and maybe be a part of their goals and moved forward. And I'm not exactly sure where that's at. So I'll circle back around. At least nothing else I have an answer for you next time.
And then the item that came up from the development on the Embarcadero was the convoluted way that we were dealing with the eelgrass habitat. Was there any way that we could do a global solution for that? It seems like that would be a real bonus for all of the lease sites down there.
Yeah, I mean it's something that we've gotten together with the resource agencies. Probably 8 months ago with Scott Kimura, we were all on the phone with the Coastal Commission staff, with Fish and Game, Fish and Wildlife. There were National Estuary Program, and there were some others that we were on the phone with, and everybody was kind of talking about it. Everybody's like, yeah, a mitigation bank solution similar to like they use down in Long Beach and something like that is something that we could do. It's just having a resource agency that's able to do it. Right now we don't have capacity internally from the city staff standpoint to do that. So NEP seems like a natural fit because they've been working at replanting eelgrass out in the bay for a while. But they've sort of changed over some folks over there recently too. So I don't know where that's at on their agenda. We're supposed to have a meeting with them coming up here in a little bit. So that might be one of the conversations we have moving forward. They had some issue with being the lead on it originally from a funding standpoint. They get their funding typically from federal grants and then what that can be used for. But I was like, well, eelgrass is declining in the bay. That would seem like something that you'd be able to get grant funding for. But it seemed to be an issue the last time we spoke. So a little unclear as to why that was the case. And maybe it's not necessarily the issue moving forward. But they seem like a natural place to house the program at, because then applicants could come forward. They could pay money, based on the amount of habitat restoration they're required to do, to an agency, NEP, that could then go out and do the restoration work and do the monitoring of of the restoration work, as opposed to the way we do it now. It's on a case by case basis throughout the bay, and it's really tough for the leaseholders. And you're agreeing to something that's like an unknown number that may never end, because if you don't achieve the replanting amount, then you just keep going and going and going, and that's, I think, one, not fair, but two, we want to have it restored, so we should have a more holistic approach probably to it. It's just, it's kind of getting the framework of that together. I mean, that discussion was not incorrect. We need to come up with something, because the way we do it now makes very little sense. It's super expensive, and it's not really that fair to the leaseholders, to lock them into this sort of unknown cost that goes on for a long time.
And this side of the Embarcadero, whereas the economic habitat may not be the best place for the ecological habitat, because you have a lot more activity there. You've got boats moving in and out. You got boats shading them. You've got, it just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. But
yeah.
Kind of following up on that eelgrass thing, part of the problem is we got to start holding polluters accountable. And I know the regional board is getting involved in that back bay thing because of the, like CMC and stuff. But I agree that, putting it on the, just a leaseholder and in these little patches, and how are we going to deal with that? But it kind of goes back to accountability for when Army Corps basically dug out Coleman Beach, we gotta have accountability,
Yeah.
And the other thing that, on a kind of a same issue, that we're in comment period, right? Just comments, yeah. I just want to, you mentioned the water reclamation facility, and now got Harbor, bringing in, some of their issue with the dredge. There's got to be. To me, from what I see, is that there's a disconnect between planning, disconnect between Harbor, disconnect between Public Works. It's got to be integrated. And we, as a city, with regards to the wastewater treatment plant or water reclamation facility, are putting up bureaucratic obstacles from getting grant funding. Now, I'll give you one example. And I respectfully disagree with our Public Works Director where the sewage entering our Morro Basin aquifer is coming from. I'm saying it's from dilapidated infrastructure, from the MTBE remediation action that occurred back in 89 or 99. He's saying it comes from the state. Regardless, we agree on one thing, that there is, at the sucralose test, we have sewage in the water. Flint, Michigan, right now, they got federal funding, man, coming in and saying they demanded it. Let's deal with this. We as a city should be doing the same thing. If we could put Governor Brown on notice and say, look, man, if it's coming in from the state, then let's deal with it and let's not subsidize things. Like right now, we have industrial waste being put into our infrastructure. I mentioned this years ago, and they said, yeah, we got to deal with something. If we don't deal with it on a staff level or as a city, that's a form of subsidy for industrial. And eventually the people, like the last study that they did at the WRF saying the salinity issue, more than the citizens, more than the cities, salinity issue was coming from a discharger. Now, more percentage-wise, we need to address that and not burden the citizens with this WRF, oh, we got real salty wastewater. Well, it's a form of subsidy. Same with state parks. They have their dump station. It's a form of a subsidy. Same with the harbor department. They have all their stuff coming in. Eventually it's the citizen, and especially that we have a lot of fixed income, older people that, that live here, okay? And then that's what they're concerned with. Now, people that have vacation rentals or condominiums, they just pass it on to the renter, okay? It's like, okay, it's going to be, $2,000 a week instead of $1,800. But for the guy living here on a fixed income, it's a different situation.
The point that you make about grant funding is an interesting one. We've come in contact with a new person that does grant writing. Outside of all of we have the company that's associated with the WRF that's looking for grant opportunities for us and that type of thing. But we've recently come in contact with another person that does a lot of different types of grant writing, and we met with them on Friday, and we're going over all of the different types of grants that are available for all of city functions, not additional ones that would go along with with the WRF, but also ones that can be utilized by harbor, by planning, by engineering for various things, infrastructure, that type of thing, outside of the WRF process. And so we're trying to work out a scenario where we can have this individual maybe work for the city and go out and search for and acquire grants for us. And so it was a great conversation. We sat down, myself, the city manager, deputy city manager, public works director. That was on Friday, I think. So we've had a couple of meetings with this person over time, and it's been able to bring a lot of interesting ideas that maybe you wouldn't always think about as a source for grant funding for some of the recreational stuff we have around here too. So the point that you make is well taken, and it is something that we're kind of keeping our eye out about different opportunities we have out there to go get grants to help out different sectors of the city, and looking at the grant funding possibility, cohesively. How does it cross lines between different departments? And we've done a lot more of that recently. I mean, I think I've mentioned this before to you that how we deal with just the lease sites anymore. It's not just harbor. It's harbor. It's planning. So somebody doesn't think that the deal's already done before it gets to you, because that's not right. And then sitting down and having the city manager part of that lease process, as well as the deputy city manager who's responsible for economic development. So we are taking a different look at how we do business, and I think we're improving that process on how we do business. And I think it's not just that was one example, but it's pushed out to other areas, and we are kind of looking at new ways to do things and new ways to bring new opportunities to bring money into the city, because we are a bit strapped, and we have a lot of ideas about things we'd like to do. We just don't necessarily have the resources to go do them. So identifying funding sources to be able to go do some of those interesting things that we've been talking about, I think, is important, and looking at new ways to achieve that. And so we're doing that. I mean, it's exciting to be in contact with folks that have the ability to maybe get us some money for things for grant programs that we were maybe not even aware of. But this is a grant writer that's worked in in the college area, getting grants for different schools, and then on the private sector, getting grants for the private sector as well. So he's got a wide range of experience. So it looks good. So hopefully this pans out. I mean, it's kind of an exciting process we've been going through recently, and I'm sort of looking forward to seeing it play out.
That's an encouragement, really, what you just said. That's an encouragement, because that we really need, and I had recently called a state water board guy, they were, anyway, the issue is that, it's easier in a way to try to go SRF loan and all that, but when you get grant, you get more scrutiny. We shouldn't be afraid of scrutiny at all. We should be transparent, no problem. Well, we have a problem? Okay, can you help us with it? For there's disadvantaged community sections that we are, and we should take advantage of these things, And
those are absolutely things that we talked about, and as well as partnering, because the end game, right, is to have a water reclamation facility when we're done, right? So water, in some way, shape, or form, we're getting out of the end. Partnering with a university that could get grant funding to do studies on how we do that and what that looks like. That was one of the things he brought to the table. He goes, you got to kind of look at who you could partner with, and you get kind of economies of scale. You can get grants to work with the university. You can get grants that the city can use on its own. You can combine those together and sort of leverage one off the other. He goes, there's different ways you need to look at it, and it's not something that I think was coming forward, but those ideas were, I think, really exciting and could be, partnerships that we move forward with that looks at, how we achieve that water and what technologies we use, and looking at current technologies and that type of thing. So that was some of the conversation we've been having. So
yeah, good. And we kind of have a history of working with Cal Poly in the past, so it's not like that's a totally unexplored area.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Any other? I have one question. I'm sorry, guys. I had just one fairly brief. I'm just curious as to what is happening in terms of code enforcement activities since we've hired the new officers.
So they came on board end of October, middle of November in that area, and we've been doing our sort of public outreach campaign a little bit. We've had Bay News articles, a couple articles in the Tribune you may or may not have seen. We did the utility mailer in December, I think, that included the top 10 code enforcement items. That was interesting. Sent that out and got a whole bunch of complaints. So the code enforcement guys came on board. We've hired 2 part-time code enforcement officers with they each have a lot of experience doing code enforcement. And they came on board, we're kind of getting their office and everything all set up, and then we sent those things out, got a bunch of complaints in, and then they had to deal with all of those complaints. So it sort of delayed our processing of getting some more of the information together, like the flyers and things for the top 10 items and whatnot. But they were able to work through that initial run of complaints that we got, and they're kind of gotten a handle on most of it now. It was a lesson, though, when you're going to go after something, be prepared to get the responses back. So both of them, they work, both the code enforcement officers work part-time. They're working during the week right now. That will transition over across weekends once we get into the busier season. But right now, kind of having them work together a little bit so they can kind of set the program up. The good thing is one of them was responsible for running a half a code enforcement division for the city of Denver. So he ran 20 people underneath him. Other person that we have did code enforcement for various areas, and then also has worked parking enforcement for UC Santa Barbara, which is interesting because we're maybe looking at regulating parking a little bit or something like that. So got some guys with some interesting experience, super nice guys. They're really good at outreach and talking to the public, which is great because when you're telling people that they can't do something, you want to have people that are personable. Both of them are very nice. One's name is Dave and the other is Tim. So right now they're putting together we identified the top 10 topics, and now they're putting together individual flyers for each one of those, and then we're getting ready to go out neighborhood by neighborhood and identify these things, and then pass out flyers that talk about to the folks that have the violations that are in the top 10, and let people know about that, and know that we're going to be doing some more proactive code enforcement in about 3 months. Where we're going to be really going through the process, and and then we'd be sending out, when you had a violation, say an RV in the front yard that you can't have right now, you'd get a letter saying you have X number of days to move it, and then that would maybe be followed by a second letter that says, okay, you didn't move it within that first 15-day period. Now you have 5, and then at the end of that 5-day period, you get a citation. So we have the ability to issue citations, and that'll be part of it as well once we've finished the educational component of things. Also, having a long kind of lead time on the front end of the educational piece is good, because people, like the RV one's a good one. People are like, well, I want to have my RV in my front yard, and so they can have that conversation. They can bring that to council, that type of thing. It gives them the opportunity for any of those type of things to bring those issues up and have a conversation at that level about whether that's something that we want to change in our ordinance or not. These are policies that are in place now. We're not making them up. It's just when you start proactively enforcing, that means code enforcement guys are driving around out there, and when they see them, you're getting a letter about it. And so that's kind of where we're going with that. It's sort of the educational, a little bit of a warning type thing out there, that we're going to be looking at this coming up here in April, and potentially at that point issuing citations and going through the real code enforcement process. Right now, it's sort of letting you know that you might have a violation, but that'll change, and you'll be on the list then, and that type of thing. So that's kind of where it's at. We'll see how that goes.
Would it be fair to assume that the sign part of this is going to kind of wait for the new sign ordinance to come through?
Yeah, we want to get the new sign ordinance squared away probably before we wade into that too much. I was hoping to already have the meeting, but I wanted to set up I need to meet with the chamber, and I want to involve them. They were involved the last time we went around and did this, and I'd like to get them involved as well, to help do part of the outreach and get the folks, and to contact the folks that we need to be talking to. So I'm going to do that in conjunction with Deputy City Manager Sam Taylor, and then hopefully with the chamber coming up here in the next week or two. Right now, we kind of we're trying to get the general plan LCP update kicked off. We're meeting internally for the first time on Thursday with staff, with the consultant Michael Baker International. Was putting together the contract for that process today, and getting that all vetted through the city attorney's office so we can get it signed and get everything set up. So kind of where we're at with that.
Okay. Well, I have no more comments. If nobody else does, I guess it's up. You're on stage if there's things that you need to tell us that you haven't.
I do have a couple things. As part of your packet, you received resolution 04-16. What this does is re-emphasize the fact that our zoning code is permissive. And what that means is, if a use is not enumerated inside of the code, say for a given zone, then it's prohibited. Why are we doing this right now? Well, it's in response to recent legislation that passed related to medical marijuana, and specifically cultivation. And if we didn't take action by March 1st about what we're doing with this, then what would happen is the regulation of medical marijuana, specifically cultivation, would fall to the state, and we wouldn't be able to get it back. And so what doing this does is, this is two things. We're passing an ordinance that says you can't do cultivation in the city right now, and then then passing this resolution that emphasizes that our zoning is permissive. There's nothing in our zoning ordinance that talks about cultivation within city limits, other than under the Compassionate Care Act. And that's for, what is it? You can do it if you have a medical marijuana card, and it's under, I think you serve under 5 people or something like that. I'm probably butchering that, so don't pay attention too closely to that. But there is exceptions, subject to the Compassionate Care Act. But this is for larger scale grows and that type of thing. And what this does is allows the city to maintain its authority over this issue. And so we can maybe take a step back because the legislature passed this at the end of their last legislative session, kind of running through the end of the year, and it took effect pretty quickly. And so you have a bunch of cities in the state of California scrambling around doing just what we're doing. And because, the ordinance is put in a different section, not the zoning piece of it, we wanted to make sure we did the permissive zoning thing as well. Because to put it in our zoning ordinance, it's part of our LCP, it's probably going to take you 6 to 8 months to get it through. That wasn't going to meet the deadline, that would have been an issue. So we went about it in this manner at the direction of the city attorney's office and the League of California Cities, quite frankly. This is the way they suggested that you do it as well. The idea would be that we're stepping back and having a little more time to realize, to take a look at how we might regulate this in the future. And then coming up in 2016 in November, there's probably going to be 1 or 2 ballot measures that are out there that address or move forward the concept of recreational marijuana. And that, that's probably going to change how we deal with things if that passes. It would be similar to Colorado and other states that have passed similar legislation. So it just basically allows us to hold our authority and allows us more time to take a look at what this might mean and what the impacts might be moving forward. And so that's why it was done. But I wanted to give you a copy of it, so in case anybody asked you, you'd understand what that meant. Beyond that, the next Planning Commission meeting, I hope you're all going to be there. We're doing the election of officers. Just keep that in mind, who you might want being chair and vice chair. We'll have our new Planning Commissioner sitting up there with you at that point. And what else did I have? I had one other thing. Wanted to make note that the Coastal Commission is coming to town February 10th through the 12th. They'll be holding their meetings at the Inn at Morro Bay. Wanted to let everybody know that that's coming down the road, and if you want to go see what a Coastal Commission meeting looks like, you can show up there. They're public hearings, just like our Planning Commission and City Council meetings, and likely to have at least they're working to have the Toro Lane item on that agenda. I guess it'll depend on whether they're actually able to put it all together. Whitney's been working feverishly to get them all the information they need to make the decisions for their staff reports and so forth. So anyway, that's coming up. And again, that'll cover February 10th to the 12th at the Inn at Morro Bay. And that's all I have.
So, Scott, it's very clear how this resolution applies to medical marijuana cultivation. Do you foresee it causing any other change in the way we operate or deliberate on proposals?
I don't, only because our ordinance does have the other policy in there that says things that are not specifically identified in here, the decision as to whether they're allowed or not allowed can be determined by you, and in some instances me. So that authority is in there. So it does allow you to make, just like it allows you to make interpretations, that authority is in the zoning code. It says, hey, if it's not specifically discussed or there's questions, the Planning Commission has the authority to make interpretations of what the code and policy says. This was really, again, it was to address medical marijuana, but it was also to say that the zoning code, the whole zoning code, is permissive in nature. And that's an assertion being made because of the way it's written in the language of it, because it does, for the most part, already say that it says, hey, these are the uses that are allowed in these zones. If it's not here, then it's not really allowed, unless the Planning Commission were to say otherwise. So.
Okay. Any other remarks? Ending? Nope. With that, we will adjourn to our next regularly scheduled meeting, which will be here on February 2nd this year.